What if Jon Snow bonded with a dragon before he ever met Daenerys Targaryen? Not a grand moment, not a prophecy landing in golden light. A ranger came back to Castle Black from arranging beyond the wall, and he was changed in the way rangers came back, changed sometimes, but differently from the cold and the fear and the dead. He came back and he said, "There's something in the mountains east of the Fist. Not a white. Something else. Something old." Jon went to look. What he found was not a dragon. Not at first. What he found was an egg. One single enormous stone-cold egg wedged in a rock crevice in the high eastern passes, miles beyond the wall, in the place where the ancient Targaryen line and the ancient wall had once, apparently, overlapped in a way nobody had bothered to record. He picked it up. It was warm. That was the first wrong thing. Everything in the high passes beyond the wall in winter was cold. The rock was cold. His hands were cold. The egg was warm in the way of something that had been cold for a very long time, and had recently decided not to be anymore. He brought it back to Castle Black. He kept it in his quarters, because he didn't know what else to do with it. 3 weeks later, it hatched, and then nothing was ever the same again. Castle Black, 299 AC. He'd been Lord Commander for 8 months. The specific weight of that, 8 months. The youngest Lord Commander in the history of the Watch, elected by men twice his age, because the alternatives had been worse, and Jon Snow had the kind of competence that announced itself, whether or not you wanted it to, was something he carried without acknowledging carrying it, which was the Jon Snow way. The egg sat on the table by his bed. He'd told no one. He'd thought about telling Sam, and decided that Sam would have opinions, many of them well-researched, and some of them correct, and he wasn't ready for well-researched opinions yet. He'd thought about telling Aemon, but Aemon was old and blind, and already carrying the specific weight of being the last living Targaryen, and Jon wasn't sure yet what the egg meant, or whether it meant anything at all. He hadn't told Aemon he was a Targaryen either. That was its own long conversation. He sat on the edge of his bed in the Lord Commander's quarters at Castle Black, and looked at the egg, and the egg sat there being warm. It had been getting warmer, not gradually, in steps. He would leave for arranging and come back, and the warmth would be different, more concentrated, more directional, like something working its way from the center outward. On the Tuesday of the 3rd week, it cracked. Not loudly. A sound like good pottery, finding a flaw under pressure, the specific, controlled fracture of something that knows what it's doing. He'd been at his desk writing reports, and the sound came from behind him, and he turned very slowly, because some part of him had known this was coming, and the knowing had its own gravity. The crack ran from the top to the midpoint. Pale light at the edges of it. Not firelight. Something more internal. The glow of a process rather than a source. He went and sat on the floor in front of it. He sat there for 4 hours while it worked. The dragon that came out was not large. Jon had expected large. The histories describe dragons in terms of armies and shadows, and the scale of natural disasters. And this creature was the size of a large cat, which was not the size of a natural disaster by any reasonable measure. Its scales were dark, not black, the color of iron that has been heated and cooled, the dark, warm gray of forged metal with bronze at the edges in the places where the light found it. Its eyes were gold. They found Jon immediately. They found him the way Ghost's eyes had found him, that first morning on the road to Castle Black with the puppy in his arms. The specific quality of recognition between two things that are, at some level, the same kind of thing. He put his hand out. The dragon stepped forward on its new legs, with the calculated uncertainty of something that was figuring out legs for the first time, and pressed its head against his palm. He felt the warmth of it through his cold fingers. He thought, so this is real. He thought, Ghost. He looked at the door. Ghost was sitting at it. He had been sitting at it for 4 hours, apparently. The wolf looked at the dragon with the expression, if you called it an expression, of an animal that had been waiting for something to arrive, and was acknowledging its arrival. Jon sat on the floor of the Lord Commander's quarters, with a dragon in his lap, and a direwolf at the door, and the Night's Watch sleeping on the other side of the wall. He said, to no one. Right. He kept the dragon hidden for 2 weeks. This was harder than it sounds. The dragon was small enough to conceal, barely in the first days. But small was not the same as quiet. It made sounds, not loud, not the roar of the histories, a kind of low persistent resonance that was felt more than heard, a vibration in the chest that the men near his quarters kept attributing to the wind. 2 weeks was how long it took Jon to accept that he had to tell someone. He told Sam. Sam's response was silence for approximately 90 seconds, followed by, "That's a dragon." "Yes." "You have a dragon." "I have a dragon." "In the Night's Watch." "Yes." Sam sat down. He looked at the creature, which was now the size of a medium dog and growing visibly. "The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch has a dragon." "Yes." "Jon, I know. This is historically unprecedented. The Night's Watch and the Targaryens have had an association since, and you're—" He stopped. He looked at Jon. "You're a Targaryen." Jon said nothing. Sam said, "You are. You have to be. Dragons don't bond to anyone else. The histories are clear on that." He looked at the dragon, and then at Jon, and back again, with the rapid, focused assessment of someone whose scholarship was clicking into place around a new fact. "Jon, you're Targaryen." Jon said, "That is a conversation for another time." "When is another time?" "When I've figured out what this means." Sam looked at the dragon. He said, "What's its name?" Jon had been avoiding this. Naming was a commitment. Naming was, "This is real, and it stays." But it had been 2 weeks, and it was real, and it was staying. He said, "Scaros." Sam said, That's High Valyrian. It means, I know what it means." Sam looked at him. Jon looked at the dragon. "Scaros, which meant the Iron One, which meant the one who came out of the dark forged, which meant the thing you find when you go to places most people don't go." It looked back at him with the gold eyes. "Right," Sam said eventually. "Right. The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch has a dragon named Iron, and we're all just going to keep this contained until I know what to do with it. Jon, there's a dragon in the Lord Commander's quarters. I know where the dragon is. You can't contain—" "Sam." He looked at his friend. "I need time. I need to think. I need to understand what this means before the rest of the world starts having opinions about it." Sam looked at him. He said, "How much time do you think you have?" Jon looked at Scaros, who had grown 2 inches in the past 2 weeks and showed no signs of stopping. He said, "Not much." Castle Black. The telling. 299 AC, he told Maester Aemon first. Aemon was 96 years old and blind, and he was the only other Targaryen in the world, which was a category that had expanded since Jon's hatching, but that Jon had been carrying alone since Bran confirmed it at Winterfell. He went to the Master's quarters at night, when the castle was at its quietest, and he told him. Aemon listened. When Jon finished, the old man was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Bring it to me." Jon brought Scaros. The dragon was restless on the walk over. Unusual. It was generally calm around Jon, the two of them having developed the specific rhythm of creatures that had decided to trust each other. On the walk to Aemon's quarters, it moved differently. Alert. Jon set it on the table near where Aemon sat. The old man's hands, which were the careful hands of someone who has learned to read the world through touch, moved forward and found the dragon's head. Scaros held very still. Aemon's face changed. Not dramatically. The very old, when they feel something large, tend to feel it inward rather than outward. But something moved across his expression that Jon had not seen there before. He said, in High Valyrian, "Blood of my blood." Scaros made the resonant sound. Jon stood in the doorway and watched a 96-year-old man who had spent his whole life renouncing his birthright, hold a dragon and be returned for a moment to something he had given up. He looked away. When Aemon spoke again, his voice was different, cleared of something. He said, You know what you are. Jon said, I know some of it. He said, Lyanna's son. Yes. And Rhaegar's. He was quiet. I knew your father. Not well. I was an old man in a cold castle by then. But I knew him. I knew what he believed. A pause. He believed the world would need someone. He spent his life arranging for that someone to exist. Jon said, People keep telling me things about my father's beliefs. Nobody asks what I believe. Aemon turned toward his voice. The old eyes, which saw nothing and somehow still found you. What do you believe? Jon said. I believe the dead are real. I believe what's beyond this wall is worse than what anyone south of it has been told. I believe... He paused. I believe the dragon appeared for a reason, and I'm not sure the reason is a prophecy. Aemon said, What reason then? Jon said, The same reason weapons exist. Not because of destiny, because they're needed. The old man sat with this. He said, You'll need to tell the Watch. I know. Not everything, but enough. I know. And you'll need to leave, eventually. Jon looked at him. Aemon said, The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch cannot have a dragon and stay the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The Watch belongs to the realm. Dragons belong to the dynasty. Those are not the same category. Jon said, The Watch is my life. Aemon said, The Watch is the life you chose before you knew what you were. He turned back toward the dragon. This changes the available options. Jon said, I'm not going to march on King's Landing. Aemon said, No one asked you to. He stroked the dragon's head. Joffrey is on the throne, and the North is at war, and a Targaryen claimant with a dragon is a complication regardless of his intentions. He paused. But the dead don't care about the succession. The dead don't care about the Lannisters or the Starks or who sits in what chair. The dead are coming, and whatever you are, your dragon is the specific thing that is most useful against them. Jon said, Fire. Aemon said, Fire, yes. Jon looked at Scarros, who was sitting beside Aemon with the gold eyes tracking something in the room that only it could see. He said, The Watch won't let me leave. Aemon said, The Watch is 600 men in 3-man castles. You're the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and you have a dragon. He paused. They'll let you leave. Castle Black, the Assembly, 299 AC. He called the Assembly in the yard. Not the Great Hall. The yard was visible to everyone in the castle, and visibility was part of what he needed. He called it for the morning of the first clear day after the news had spread sufficiently on its own, which had taken exactly 4 days from when he told Sam, which he'd expected. He stood on the raised platform in the Castle Black yard. 600 men stood below him. Scarros sat at his feet. The dragon was now the size of a large dog. It sat with its wings partially spread, not threateningly, more the way a hawk spread its wings when it landed, establishing the fact of itself. And it looked at 600 brothers of the Night's Watch who were looking at it with the expressions of men who had read the reports about the dead and had thought they had calibrated their capacity for the unbelievable and were now recalibrating. Jon looked at them. He said, You've all seen it by now. You know it's real. I'm not going to pretend the past month of rumors hasn't happened and explain it from first principles. Somebody toward the back said, Is it a dragon? Jon said, Yes. The yard was quiet. He said, I found an egg in the high passes east of the Fist. 3 weeks later, it hatched. What you're looking at is the result. He looked at them steadily. What it means for the Watch is what I called this assembly to discuss. A ranger named Alliser Thorne, who had hated Jon since training, and who had voted against his election, and who had been a thorn in his specific side for the past 8 months, said, It means the Lord Commander has been keeping secrets. It means we've had a dragon in our walls for a month without the Assembly knowing about it. Jon said, Yes, that's a fair criticism. I needed time to understand what I had before I told you. I'm telling you now. He held Thorne's gaze. The Watch is founded on the principle that what happens beyond the wall is everyone's concern. That hasn't changed. What has changed is what I have available to address it with. Thorne said, "You're Targaryen," Jon said, "by blood. My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen. I've known this for 2 years." He said it flat. No apology in it. No performance. I didn't tell the Watch because I didn't think it was relevant to the Watch. The dragon makes it relevant. The yard erupted. He let it run. There was the shouting of men who felt deceived, and the shouting of men who were afraid of the dragon, and the shouting of men who were calculating what a Lord Commander with Targaryen blood meant for the political situation in the south, and the shouting of men who were simply frightened of a thing they hadn't expected. He let it run. After 5 minutes, he raised his hand. The yard was trained. They quieted. He said, "I'm not leaving the Watch to march on King's Landing. I'm not going to use this position or this dragon to pursue a political claim. That's not what this is." He looked at them. "The dead are real. You know this. You've seen them. The ranging reports have been building towards something for 30 years, and it's coming." He paused. "Dragonfire is one of the 2 things that stops the Night King. Not the army, the Night King. What directs the dead? The accounts are consistent on this." He paused again. "I didn't find this egg because of a prophecy. I found it because I went to a place most people didn't go. What I'm going to do with it is what the Watch has always done. Face what's coming with what we have." Silence. A young ranger named Ed Tollett, who had been following Jon since before the first battle at the Fist, and who had a particular gift for saying the thing that cut through the noise, said, "So you're staying?" Jon said, "I'm staying as long as I'm the right person to stay. When that changes, I'll tell you." Ed said, "That's not actually an answer." Jon said, "I know." Ed said, "The dragon stays too." Jon said, "The dragon goes where I go." Ed looked at Scaros. Scaros looked back at Ed. Ed said, "Right." He turned to the man beside him. "I'm going to need more wine." Castle Black. The Ravens. 299 AC. The Ravens started going out the same day. Not from Jon. He hadn't decided yet what to send south and to whom. The Ravens went out from the brothers who had family south of the wall, and who had seen what they'd seen, and who had the natural human need to tell someone what you'd witnessed. The first official word Jon got that the news had reached King's Landing was a raven from Varys. Not signed as from Varys. Signed as from a contact in the capital, whose name Jon didn't recognize, but whose handwriting had the specific looped efficiency of someone who wrote many letters under many names. The letter was 3 sentences. It said, "The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch has a dragon. King's Landing is discussing this. It would be useful to know what the Lord Commander intends." Jon read it 3 times. He wrote back, "The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch intends to defend the wall. What the dragon is useful for is fire. The dead don't negotiate. He sent it." The reply came in 4 days. It said, "Daenerys Targaryen is in Essos with 3 dragons and an army. She is 6 weeks sailing from Westeros. She does not yet know you exist. You should consider what that means before she finds out from someone else." Jon sat with this. He had known, abstractly, that Daenerys existed. Sam had told him, after the egg hatched, working through the Targaryen family tree with the focused excitement of a man who had been wanting to discuss this for years. He had known she was alive and in Essos, and had dragons of her own. He had not thought through what it meant for both of them to exist simultaneously. He had not thought through what it meant that he had a dragon before she came west. He had not thought through what it meant that the dynasty was suddenly not 1 person with 3 dragons, but potentially 2 people with 4 dragons, which changed the political arithmetic of the succession in ways that he was going to have to think about very carefully. He had not thought through any of this because he had been managing a dragon and arranging season, and the dead, and the specific daily demands of 600 men who were learning to live with a dragon in their walls. He thought about it now. He thought, she is going to come west eventually. She has been building toward it her whole life, from what Sam said. And when she comes west, she is going to have to decide what to do about the fact that there is already a Targaryen with a dragon in Westeros. He thought, that conversation is going to be significant. He thought, I should probably not be the last person in the conversation to prepare for it. He wrote to Sam. He said, tell me everything you know about Daenerys Targaryen. Sam told him everything. Castle Black, Aemon, 299 AC. Aemon died in the 4th month after the hatching. Not unexpectedly. He was 96 years old and had been at Castle Black for 60 of them, and his body had been telling him for years that it was running out of time in which to carry him through his days. He had managed the running out with the specific calm of someone who had made his peace with most things long ago and was waiting on a few last ones. The last one, Jon understood afterward, had been the dragon. He had been waiting, in the way Aemon waited for things, to hold a dragon one more time before he died. He had given up the throne. He had given up the name. He had given up the dynasty and the world that the dynasty had built, and had become, instead, the thing that kept the records and trained the ravens, and was useful in the specific way of people who understand that use is a kind of love. He had held Scaros. He died 3 weeks after. Not peacefully, the Maester said. The end was difficult, as the end was for old people when the body stopped cooperating before the mind was willing. But not in pain. The Maester was precise about this in the way Jon needed him to be precise. Jon sat with the body after the Maester left. Scaros came in. The dragon was still small enough to navigate the doorways of the old quarter of Castle Black, and he came in and he sat beside the bed, and he looked at the old man who had held him and said, blood of my blood, and had gone. Jon sat on the floor. He thought about Aemon Targaryen, who had been offered a throne and had turned it down, because he believed in a thing called the Night's Watch, and that thing needed someone to believe in it. He thought about 96 years of believing in a thing that the rest of the world was not particularly interested in, and continuing to believe in it anyway. He thought, that's what I've been doing. He thought, I learned it from the wrong teacher. He was a better example than I understood. He said, he knew you were real. He said it to Scaros. The dragon turned to look at him. Jon said, he held you and said, blood of my blood. He was saying, this is what we are. This is the actual physical truth of what we are. He paused. He'd given up everything except the watch. And then at the end, he got to hold a dragon again. He was quiet. He said, I'm going to try to be worth that. What he gave up. Scaros made the resonant sound. Jon sat with the body for a long time. When he came out, Sam was in the corridor. Sam said, I'm sorry. Jon said, he was ready. Sam said, that doesn't make it. Jon said, I know. He looked at the door. He held the watch together for 60 years. He trained Meisters and kept records and answered questions and maintained the thing that was supposed to be maintained when everyone else was looking south. He paused. I'm going to put that in the record, not just his service, what he actually did. Sam said, I can help with that. Jon said, I know you can. He started down the corridor. Come on, there's work. There was always work. He went to do it. The growing, 299 AC. Scaros grew. Not the explosive growth of the legends. Not the overnight doubling that made the old accounts feel like they had been exaggerating, which Jon had suspected they were until he started measuring. The growth was steady and relentless, and consistent in the way of something that had been suppressed for a century and was making up for lost time. 3 months after hatching, the size of a horse. 6 months after hatching, larger. A year after hatching, the largest living thing at Castle Black by a significant margin, sleeping in the yard because he no longer fit in any room, and because sleeping in the yard had the advantage that he warmed the surrounding area in a way that the brothers found they didn't mind. The cold beyond the wall was getting worse. The cold within the wall was getting better. Nobody acknowledged the irony except Sam. Who was Sam? Jon flew for the first time in the 4th month. He didn't plan it. He was in the yard doing the thing he'd been doing every morning, standing near Scaros, maintaining the bond the way you maintained anything, through presence and attention and the specific effort of being fully where you were, when the dragon simply spread his wings, and Jon, without deciding to, put his hands on the base of the neck and found a position that was the position, the one the body had apparently been waiting to find, and Scaros took 3 steps, and they were in the air. He thought, ascending. This is what it's like to be wrong about everything you thought your life was. The wall from above was not the wall from below. From below, it was the fact that defined the north, the vertical reality that said, here is the edge of the world. From above, it was a line across a landscape that went on in every direction without apparent limit, and the line was in itself remarkable. 8,000 years of human intention made physical, visible from the sky as exactly what it was, which was the accumulated effort of people who believed the world required protecting. He flew along the wall to the east. He flew over the haunted forest. He looked north. The cold was visible from above in a way it wasn't from the ground. Not the ambient cold of winter, but the directional cold, the cold with a source. He could see where the source was. Not precisely, not a specific point, but a direction and a quality of the air that said, there, that way. That is where the thing is building. Scaros made the resonant sound. Jon thought, this is the reconnaissance no ranger could do. This is the view the Watch has never had. He spent 3 hours in the air. He came back with more information about the threat north of the wall than 30 years of ground-based ranging had produced. He held a briefing that evening with the senior rangers and Eamon and Sam, and he laid out what he'd seen. He said, the cold front is 20 miles further south than the last report. It's moving faster. Ranger Dolorous Ed said, of course it is. Everything gets worse. Jon said, it's organized. The direction is consistent. This isn't weather. This is something with a trajectory. Another ranger said, the Night King. Jon said, yes. The room was quiet. He said, we have time. I don't know how much. Months, maybe less than a year. He looked at them. The response we can mount from Castle Black with 600 men is not the response this requires. The response this requires is the realm. All of it. He paused. Which means we need someone who can get the realm moving, Sam said carefully. Someone, Jon said. We need to reach Daenerys Targaryen. Dragonstone. The letter. 300 AC. He wrote the letter himself. Not through Varys. Through the chain of contacts that Eamon had maintained over 96 years, of being a Maester who paid attention to where things were. One of those contacts knew a man in Old Town who knew a captain who ran a route to Braavos and who, for the right payment, would carry a letter further than Braavos. The letter said, Your Grace, my name is Jon Snow. I am the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I am also, by blood, Aegon Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, born at the Tower of Joy in Dawn. I have known this for 3 years. I have chosen to keep the name I was given, and the life I chose, and the post I hold. 7 months ago, I found a dragon egg in the mountains, east of the Fist of the First Men, beyond the wall. 6 months ago, it hatched. The dragon is alive and growing and bonded to me in the way the histories describe. His name is Scaros. I am not writing to you about the succession. I am writing to you about the dead. The Night King is real. The army of the dead is real. The cold that is moving south is not weather. It is organized. It has a direction. It will reach the wall within the year. Dragonfire is one of the 2 things the accounts say can stop the Night King himself. I have 1 dragon, and you have 3. and neither of us alone is adequate to what is coming. I am asking for a meeting. Not negotiation, not a political discussion, a meeting between two people with the same blood and the same fire who need to decide together what to do about the same threat. I have enclosed the ranging reports from the past 30 years, all of them, unedited. Read them, then decide. Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He sent the letter. He didn't know if it would reach her. He spent the time while waiting doing the things that needed doing, ranging, training, the distribution of dragonglass that had been mined at Dragonstone, and that Sam had arranged through a contact that Sam wouldn't explain, but that Jon had stopped examining. He flew Scaros in the mornings along the wall. The dead were getting closer. Essos. Daenerys reads it. She read the letter 3 times. Then she read the ranging reports. They took 2 days. She read them with the attention she brought to things that required deciding, which was the same attention she brought to everything but more concentrated, the specific quality of sitting very still, with information, and following it wherever it led, without managing where she wanted it to go. She put the last report down. She sat for a while. Tyrion, who had been watching her from the corner of the room with the expression of a man who was waiting to hear what he already suspected, said, "Well," she said, "the Night King is real," he said, "based on 30 years of reports from men who have nothing to gain from inventing it. Yes, I think we have to take that position," she said. "He has a dragon," Tyrion said. "An interesting development," she said. "A Targaryen with a dragon in Westeros, already," he said. "You're not the last Targaryen, which is either very good or very complicated depending on how you look at it," she said. "He's Rhaegar's son, by a Stark mother, who survived, apparently. Which is, the histories say otherwise. The histories are wrong. He poured wine, or were written by people who didn't know what happened in a tower in Dawn," she said. "He could be lying," Tyrion said. "He could be. A dragon bonded to him suggests otherwise. The histories are very clear that the bond doesn't work with fraud," she said. "He says he doesn't want the throne." Tyrion said, "People say many things." She looked at him. He said, "I'm not saying he's lying. I'm saying that what he says he wants and what the situation produces may be different things regardless of his intentions." He held her gaze. "He has a dragon. He has a Targaryen blood claim that supersedes yours by birth order. He has been at the wall keeping the realm safe while you've been in Essos building an army." He paused. "If he wanted to use that, he could," she said. "He's asking for a meeting." "Yes. Not demanding. Asking." "Also, yes." Tyrion looked at his cup. "The ranging reports are real. I've had people in King's Landing who've known about the watch reports for years and have been managing the information rather than acting on it. Everything in what he sent matches what I've seen suppressed." He paused. "The dead are real, and they're coming south, and he has a point that neither of you alone is adequate." She was quiet. She said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "I want you to meet him. In person, not by letter. Read the room. Understand what he is before you decide what to do with him." He paused. "He's the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who has been keeping the wall since before you left Essos. He's Rhaegar's son with a dragon. He's asking for help with the dead." He looked at her. "Those 3 things together are worth a meeting," she said. "Where?" Tyrion said. "Somewhere he can get to, and you can get to, without either of you having the tactical advantage." He thought, Dragonstone. Neutral in the sense that it's yours, which gives you the advantage. But he's the one crossing the sea, which gives him the vulnerability. He paused. "Or he can offer a location," she said. "I'll write back." She wrote back. She said, "Lord Commander, I've read the reports. I'll meet you at Dragonstone." You have 4 weeks. Come alone except for necessary company. Bring your dragon. Daenerys Targaryen, Castle Black. The night before sailing, 300 AC. Sam came to him the night before he sailed. Not for a specific reason, or not for one he named. He arrived at the Lord Commander's quarters with 2 cups and a look on his face that Jon had learned to read as, "I've been thinking about something for a long time, and I've decided to say it." Jon let him in. Sam sat down. He looked at Scaros, who had taken to sleeping in a coil in the corner of the quarters, which was possible now only because Scaros still fit and would not fit for much longer. He said, "The letter you sent, to Daenerys Targaryen?" Jon said, "Yes." Sam said, "You enclosed 30 years of ranging reports?" Jon said, "Yes." Sam said, "You didn't lead with who you are." Jon said, "I led with what matters." Sam was quiet for a moment. He turned this over. He said, "I've been thinking about what you are." Jon said, "That's a large subject." Sam said, "You're the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and you're Rhaegar's son, and you have a dragon." He looked at the fire. "Those 3 things are separately enormous. Together, they're—" He searched for the word. "Unprecedented." Jon said, "I know." Sam said, "And you keep treating each of them separately. The Lord Commander is the Lord Commander. The blood claim is the blood claim. The dragon is the dragon." He looked at Jon. "You haven't let them become a single thing." Jon said, "What would a single thing look like?" Sam said, "The king with the dragon coming to claim his throne." He held Jon's gaze. "That's what anyone else in your position would be doing. That's the story the blood and the dragon tell if you put them together." Jon said, "It's not the story I'm telling." Sam said, "I know." He looked at the cup. "I just want to make sure you know that too. That you're choosing it, not just drifting toward it because the dead are the most immediate problem." Jon looked at his friend. He said, "I grew up in this castle. I grew up as Ned Stark's bastard in the household of a man who was everything a lord should be and who died for it. I watched the North and I watched the Wall and I read the reports, and when I became Lord Commander, I understood for the first time that what the Watch was doing was the most important thing anyone was doing and that no one was paying attention." He paused. He said, "Rhaegar believed in a prophecy. He arranged his whole life around the belief. He hurt people for it. He might also have been right about it. The dead are real. The Night King was real. Something needed to be done." He held Sam's gaze. "But the prophecy was about fire, and the prince, and the singular answer. It wasn't about this." He gestured at the castle around them. "It wasn't about 600 men in 3-man castles doing the specific, unglamorous work of keeping the world safe from something the world didn't believe in." Sam said, "The Watch." Jon said, "The Watch." "Yes." He looked at the fire. "What I am is the person who belongs to the Watch. The blood and the dragon are in service of that. Not the other way around." Sam was quiet for a long time. He said, "She's going to have opinions about that." Jon said, "Daenerys?" Sam said, "She's been building toward the throne her whole life. She has an army and 3 dragons, and a plan that involves ruling the realm. You're going to arrive and tell her the dead are the important thing, and the throne is secondary." Jon said, "Yes." Sam said, "And?" Jon said, "And she's going to disagree with me at first because the throne is not secondary to her. It's the thing she's been building toward. And then she's going to read 30 years of ranging reports, and she's going to understand that I'm right, and the throne is secondary to the specific thing that's coming." Sam said, "You're very confident about that." Jon said, "I'm confident that she's intelligent and that the reports are convincing." He paused. "Everything else I'm holding loosely." Sam said, "What's everything else?" Jon said. What she's like in person. Whether the plan works. Whether I can actually get the realm moving in time. He looked at Sam. Whether the Night King is where the ranging reports say he is, or whether he's moved again. Sam said. The usual things. Jon said. The usual things. He looked at the fire. The watch will be in good hands with Ed. Sam said. Ed is competent. Jon said. Ed is more than competent. He's the person who does what needs doing without being asked, and without expecting recognition for it. He looked at Sam. Like you. Sam said. I'm not going to respond to that. Jon said. Because it embarrasses you. Sam said. Because it's manipulative, and I know you're manipulating me into staying while you sail south. He held Jon's gaze. I should go with you. Jon said. Someone needs to stay who knows the reports from inside, who can brief the Northern Lords when they arrive, who can explain the pattern to people who haven't been reading it for years. Sam said. That's me. Jon said. That's you. He paused. I need you here, Sam. Not because I can't manage without you, though the last year would have been significantly worse without you. Because the Watch needs someone who believes in it when I'm not here. Sam was quiet. He said, You're going to come back. Jon said, Yes. Sam said, You're going to deal with the dead and come back, and the Watch is going to be properly funded and properly staffed, and all the things that you've been working toward are going to happen. Jon said, That's the plan. Sam said, It's a good plan. Jon said, It's a realistic plan. Those are different. Sam looked at the fire. He said, I'm afraid. Jon said, I know. Sam said, Not about the dead. About you. He looked at Jon. You go toward things that should kill you, and they don't kill you, and eventually the probability catches up. Jon said, I've been dead once. I'm not interested in repeating it. Sam said, That's not reassuring. Jon said, I know. He stood. He put his hand on Sam's shoulder. Keep the records. Keep the reports current. Keep Ed informed of everything, and make sure he reads every ranging dispatch before he acts on anything. Sam said, I know. Jon said, And write to me. Tell me what you see from here. I'll be making decisions about the ranging patterns from a long way away, and I need your eyes. Sam said, I'll write. Jon said, Good. He went to the door. Get some sleep. The morning comes early, and the Northern Lords start arriving in 2 days. Sam said, Jon. Jon stopped. Sam said, He'd be proud. Ned. He spent 15 years carrying the secret, and the specific thing he was carrying it for is going to go stop the Night King. He paused. He'd have been proud. Jon held the door. He said, I know. He went. The crossing. Jon at sea. 300 AC. He left the watch in Ed's hands. Not officially. The Night's Watch did not formally lend authority in the way of lords' households, and the specific bureaucratic requirements of a Lord Commander taking temporary leave were not well documented because Lord Commanders generally didn't. He left Ed in practical command with Sam as counsel and 3 sets of instructions. Watch the cold front. Send ravens if anything moved. Don't tell the Crown what was happening until Jon had a chance to tell them himself. Ed had looked at him and said, You're going to meet the Dragon Queen. Jon said, Yes. Ed said, With your dragon. Jon said, I'm not leaving Scaros at the wall. Ed looked at the dragon, which was now large enough to require specific logistics for anything involving walls or doorways. He said, Good luck at sea. Scaros at sea was its own challenge. The ship captain, a man from White Harbor who had been recommended by a contact of Sam's and who had sailed stranger cargoes than this, took one look at Scaros and went through a visible process of professional recalibration. He said, The dragon flies alongside. Jon said, Yes. He said, It won't. Jon said, He won't eat anything. Or anyone. The captain said, Right. Scaros flew alongside the ship for the first 2 days, and then, seemingly out of curiosity or boredom or both, flew ahead and waited at a point on the horizon for them to catch up, which he did 3 times before apparently concluding that ships were too slow to be interesting and taking a route of his own devising. Jon stood at the stern and watched him disappear and reappear. He thought about the wall behind him. He thought about what he was sailing toward. He had been the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch for a year and 2 months. He had been managing the Watch and the Wall and the dead and the political fallout of being a Targaryen with a dragon. He had been doing all of it with the specific, focused competence of someone who had decided that competence was the answer to everything, because everything else, the blood, the name, the claim, what it meant that Rhaegar Targaryen had arranged for him to exist, was too large to address, and competence was manageable. Sailing toward Daenerys Targaryen, who was his father's sister and the living embodiment of the dynasty he'd been born into and had never asked to be born into, it occurred to him that he had been doing competence as a way of not doing the other thing. He sat on the stern with the sea around him and Ghost beside him, and he thought about what the other thing was. The other thing was figuring out what he actually wanted. Not the Watch, not the battle against the dead, not the specific tactical problems that had filled every day for years. What he wanted from the life he apparently had, which was longer and stranger and more full of impossible things than the life he'd originally planned. He didn't come to a conclusion. He thought, I'm going to meet her, and that meeting will produce the next thing to figure out, and I'll figure it out then. He thought, that is not the answer. He thought, it's the best I have right now. Scaros appeared from the south, having apparently surveyed whatever he'd wanted to survey, and landed on the prow of the ship. The captain's second did a full rotation toward the railing, and then steadied himself with professional effort. Jon watched the dragon settle. He thought, at least I know what he wants. He's incurious about almost everything, and intensely curious about the specific direction of the fire. The cold. He orients to the cold the way a compass orients to north. He thought, we're the same that way. Dragonstone. The arrival. He had been to Dragonstone in his reading only, which meant he had the facts and not the experience. The facts. Volcanic island. Ancient Targaryen fortress. The specific atmosphere of a place built by people who understood fire as both weapon and heritage. The castle was not designed to make visitors comfortable. It was designed to make them understand where they were. The experience, sailing toward it in early morning with the volcanic rock rising dark against the lighter sky, and Scaros circling overhead, and the specific quality of the air, which was different from the air anywhere else he'd been, warmer and sharper, like the island itself breathed differently. He arrived at the harbor. He expected a delegation, a steward, perhaps, or one of her advisors. He got 3 dragons. 2 of them were airborne, the enormous dark one and a second, green and bronze, circling the harbor at height. The third sat at the dock's end. He didn't know at first that the woman on the dock was Daenerys Targaryen. She was dressed plainly, and she was standing at the dock's edge, with her arms at her sides, and she was watching him come in with the full attention of someone who is doing nothing except watching. Then he saw the silver hair and the violet eyes that the histories always mentioned, and that he'd thought were probably exaggerated, and were not. She watched him dock. He stepped onto the dock. She looked at him. He looked at her. He had thought about this moment on the ship, in the way you thought about things you couldn't fully prepare for and were trying to prepare for anyway. He had thought about what she would say, and what he would say, and what the first impression would be, and how to manage the specific, complicated political weight of 2 Targaryens standing in front of each other for the first time. She said, "You're shorter than I thought." He said, "I get that." She said, "The dragons are the same size." He turned. Scaros had come around the harbor headland and was landing on the castle's upper battlements, and she was right. Scaros and the green and bronze one above were approximately the same scale. He said, "He's been growing since I found him." She said, How long ago? He said. 10 months. She looked up at Scaros, something moving across her expression that he couldn't yet read. Not quite the Queen's face. Not quite the full emotion behind it. Something in between. She said, "Come inside." He came inside. Dragonstone. The first day. They didn't have the political conversation first. He'd expected the political conversation first. The succession, the claims, the specific landscape of what two Targaryens in the same room meant for the realm. He'd been preparing for it. She apparently had different ideas about ordering. She took him to the dragons, not to meet them in any formal sense. She walked him to the shore below the castle where Drogon had landed on the black sand, and she stood beside the enormous dark dragon with the easy familiarity of someone who had been here 1,000 times, and she looked at Jon. She said, "What do you feel?" He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When you're near them, my dragons, what do you feel?" He stood on the black sand and paid attention to what he actually felt rather than what he thought he should feel. He said, "Recognition?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Like..." He looked for the words. "Like Ghost. When Ghost first came. Not, this is a wolf I am responsible for. More like, this is something that is the same order of thing as I am." She looked at him. She said, "You've thought about this?" He said, "I had 10 months of not knowing what I had to think about it." She walked to Drogon and put her hand on the dragon's neck. "Drogon, this is..." She paused. "What do I call you?" He said, "Jon is fine." She looked at him. He said, "I know the other name. I'm not using it." She turned back to Drogon. "Drogon, this is Jon." The enormous dragon looked at Jon with the amber eyes as something that was assessing. Jon stepped forward. He didn't reach out. That felt like the wrong gesture. Too presumptuous. A forced thing. He just stood in front of Drogon and let the assessment happen. Drogon exhaled. Jon felt the warmth of the breath, which was not the warmth of a fire, but the warmth of something that was fire in potential, contained. Drogon lowered his head. Daenerys made a sound. Not language. Involuntary. Jon put his hand on the dragon's nose. The contact was different from Scaros. Different bond. Different temperature. Different quality of recognition. But there was recognition. The same root. The same old blood. He stepped back. He looked at Daenerys. She was looking at him with an expression he'd spent the whole sail trying to prepare for, and had not prepared for, which was not political or strategic or guarded. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has been something specific their entire life. The last dragon, the last Targaryen, the singular fire in a cold world, and has just encountered the evidence that they were not alone. He understood that expression from the inside. He said, "I didn't ask for it either." She said, "I know." She looked at Drogon, who was still watching Jon with the amber eyes. "I've been the last of my family since I was born. The last everything." She looked back. "You've been the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch," he said. "I've been Ned Stark's bastard most of my life." She said, "He sounds like he was worth being the bastard of." He said, "Yes." He looked at the sea. "He died for the secret, for what I am. I never got to thank him." She was quiet. She said, "My brother Rhaegar died at the Trident. He believed in a prophecy. He believed the world would need someone. He made choices based on that belief that cost everyone around him." She held his gaze. "You're the person the choices produced." He said, "I know." She said, "Are you the person the prophecy meant?" He said, "I don't believe in prophecies." She said, "Neither did I." She looked up at Drogon. "I believe in dragons. I believe in what I can see." She looked at him. "I'm deciding what I believe about you." He said, "That's fair." She said, Come inside. We should talk about the dead. Dragonstone, the war room, 300 AC. The war room had a map of the realm on the table. It was larger and more detailed than any map Jon had seen at Castle Black, the product of resources and time that the Watch had never had. He looked at it with the eye of a man who had been reading ranging reports and building a picture from incomplete data, and was now seeing a more complete version. Tyrion was there. He had heard about Tyrion from Sam, who had heard about him from everyone who had ever spent time at court, and he was. Jon looked at him and thought, this is the most dangerous person in the room who isn't a Targaryen. Not dangerous in the way of fighters. Dangerous in the way of someone who processes information at a speed that leaves everyone else responding to where he's already been. Tyrion looked at Jon. He said, "You're not what I expected." Jon said, "I get that." Tyrion said, "You're wearing a Night's Watch cloak." Jon said, "I'm the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch." Tyrion said, "You're Aegon Targaryen with a dragon." Jon said, "Both things are true. I prefer the first one." Tyrion looked at him for a moment. "Fair enough." He looked at Daenerys. "He's not going to make this easy," she said. "I didn't ask for easy." They sat. Jon laid out what he'd seen from the air, the cold front's position and movement, the patterns in 30 years of ranging reports, the specific gap between what the Watch had and what the threat required. He laid it out the way he'd always laid things out, which was, here is the information, here is what it says, here is what the options are, here is what I think the right option is. No drama, no performance. The clean line between the facts and the analysis. Tyrion listened with both hands folded and his eyes tracking between the map and Jon's face and the windows. Daenerys listened with her whole body. Not the managed pose of the throne room, but the full physical attention of someone for whom information was genuinely important. When Jon finished, Tyrion said, "You flew the reconnaissance yourself." Jon said, "Yes." Tyrion said, "That's data we don't have anywhere else. The Watch reports are ground level. The air is different." Jon said, "It's why I needed to get here, not just to ask for help, to show someone what the view from above shows." Tyrion said, "And what the view from above shows is," Jon said, "months, maybe less." The room was quiet. Daenerys said, "The Night King. The accounts say fire and Valyrian steel." Jon said, "The accounts are consistent on that, yes." She said, "How consistent?" He said, "Multiple independent sources across the histories. The primary engagement has to involve both elements in the same place at the same time." He paused. "Dragon glass for the army, fire and Valyrian steel for the source." She said, "You have Valyrian steel?" Jon said, "Longclaw, yes?" She said, "I have 3 dragons." Jon said, "I have 1." She looked at him. He said, "Scaros is not fully grown, but he's past the threshold where he can produce combat-level fire." He paused. "The question is how we coordinate 4 dragons against an army of the dead and a Night King." Tyrion said, "That's a very specific question." Jon said, "The threat is very specific." Tyrion looked at Daenerys. "He doesn't lead with the throne." Daenerys said, "No." Tyrion said, "Or the claim." She said, "No." Jon said, "I can hear you." Tyrion said, "I know." He looked at Jon. "The succession question doesn't go away, because we're talking about the dead. Your claim supersedes hers by birth order. That's a fact whether you acknowledge it or not." Jon said, "The dead don't care about the succession." Tyrion said, "The Lords of Westeros do." Jon said, "Then the Lords of Westeros are looking in the wrong direction." He held Tyrion's gaze. "The succession question can wait. What's coming doesn't wait." Tyrion was quiet for a moment. He said, "I think I actually believe you." Jon said, "Thank you." Tyrion said, "That wasn't a compliment. I find it extremely inconvenient." Dragonstone. The dragons. The first flight, she suggested it on the second morning. He was in the yard before anyone else was awake. Old habit, built from the wall, where the pre-dawn hour was the specific hour when the cold announced its intentions for the day. He was with Scaros, doing the morning presence routine that the bond required, when she appeared at the yard entrance. She said, "Do you want to fly them together?" He said, "Together." She said, "All four, to see what the dynamic is." She looked at Drogon, who had also appeared from wherever he spent his nights. "We're going to be coordinating in a battle, knowing how they interact in the air matters." He said, "Yes." She called the dragons, all four of them assembled in the way of animals that had independently decided they were going to participate in something. Not the assembly of creatures that had been trained, but the assembly of creatures that had understood an invitation and were responding to it with their own authority. Drogon, enormous, the center of gravity. Rhaegal and Viserion on either side. Scaros at the far end, the smallest, the darkest, watching the others with the gold eyes. Jon watched Scaros watch the other dragons. He had never seen Scaros near other dragons. He had never seen Scaros near anything except the watch, which was not a comparable reference point. He expected, what? Competition, the assertion of territory, the specific animal politics of creatures sharing space. What he got was different. The four dragons settled together in the yard with the ease of creatures that recognized each other, not the ease of familiarity. None of them had met before. The ease of something more fundamental, blood, the same deep root. Scaros walked to Rhaegal. The green dragon looked at him. Scaros made the resonant sound. Rhaegal answered in kind. Jon looked at Daenerys. She was watching the dragons with the expression she'd had on the dock, the one that had not been political. He said, "They know each other." She said, "They know what they are." The same thing. She watched them. Like meeting someone who speaks your language when you've been in a country where no one does. He said, "Yes." She said, "Shall we?" He found the position on Scaros's back with the ease of months of practice, and Daenerys mounted Drogon with the ease of years, and they were in the air before either of them had to think about it. Flying together was different from flying alone. He had gotten used to the specific quality of flight with Scaros, the rhythm of it, the temperature of the air, the angle at which the wall appeared on the horizon and receded. Flying with Drogon beside him was like, he searched for the right comparison, like fighting beside someone for the first time and discovering that you anticipate each other, that the gaps in your approach are filled by theirs without discussion. She flew the way he'd expected and differently, better at the turns. She'd been doing it for years. He compensated with speed that surprised her. He could see it in the adjustment she made to stay alongside. They flew south along the coast and then turned east and then turned north. They didn't speak. You couldn't speak easily at altitude with the wind and the distance. But the flight was a kind of conversation, the negotiation of two riders and four dragons finding the shared rhythm. After an hour, they came back to Dragonstone and landed on the shore. She got down. He got down. They stood on the black sand. She said, "You're better than I expected." He said, "I had months of practice in a very unforgiving environment." She said, "The wall." He said, "Yes." She said, "What does it feel like?" "Flying over it." He said, "Like looking at a decision someone made 8,000 years ago. Someone decided the world needed protecting, and they built the largest structure in the known world to protect it." He paused. "It's humbling," she said. "People built it." He said, "Yes." She said, "Not dragons." He said, "People and dragons, the accounts say, together." She looked at Drogon. She said, "We're going to need more than 4 dragons." He said, "We're going to need the realm." She said, "The realm that's currently at war with itself." He said, "Yes." She said, "Joffrey is on the throne." He said, "Joffrey is on the throne and the Lannisters are fighting the Starks. and the north is burning, and the Night King is 20 miles further south than he was 6 months ago. He held her gaze. We have to stop the war first, or we have to make the war irrelevant, she said. How? He said. Show them what's coming. She looked at him. He said, the white. He had brought one in a box from Castle Black. Show them the dead, the same way I showed you the reports. Not description, proof, she said. And then, he said, then the people who matter start making different calculations. Dragonstone. The late nights, the real conversation. The political conversation happened on the third night, not because they'd been avoiding it. They'd been doing something more useful, which was building enough shared understanding that the political conversation could be had honestly rather than strategically. Jon had learned, mostly from watching Ned, that the order of conversations mattered. You talked about values before you talked about positions. You established what people actually cared about before you negotiated what they'd accept. She came to the room where he'd been working with maps and sat across from him and said, we need to talk about the throne. He said, I know. She said, your claim supersedes mine. He said, by birth order, yes. She said, the lords will know that once it becomes public knowledge. He said, it will become public knowledge. She said, yes. She looked at the map. What do you want? He said, I want the dead stopped. She looked at him. He said, I mean that. I've been spending every morning looking at the cold front moving south, and every night reading about what happens when the wall falls and everything else. The throne, the succession, what happens to Joffrey and Cersei and the Lannisters. All of it is less important than the specific thing that is coming north of that wall, she said. And after, when the dead are stopped, he said, if the dead are stopped, she said, when? He looked at her. She said, we have 4 dragons. We have Valyrian steel. We have the reports and the preparation that 30 years of ranging produced. We are going to stop the dead. She said it with the flat certainty of a woman who had decided something was going to happen and was not entertaining alternatives. When they are stopped. What do you want? He was quiet for a moment. He said, I want the North to be safe. I want the Watch to be what it should have been, properly funded, properly staffed, able to do what it was built to do. He paused. I want Winterfell, whatever that means. I want to go home. She said, that's not a claim to the throne. He said, no. She said, people will push you toward it. He said, let them push. She said, if you don't take it, then you take it. He met her eyes, which is what should happen. You've been building toward this your whole life. You have the army and the dragons and the legitimacy of everything you've done to build both. He looked at the map. My blood is an accident of my father's belief in a prophecy. Your claim is the product of 15 years of deliberate work. He paused. Those aren't equivalent. She was very quiet. She said, you genuinely believe that? He said, yes. She said, you're the most unusual person I've ever met. He said, I've been told I'm not what people expect. She said, that's not. She stopped. You're the only person since I was a child who has told me what I want to hear and meant something real by it. She looked at him. Most people tell me what I want to hear because I'm the person with the army. You told me what you actually think. He said, I generally do. She said, I know. She looked at the map. We need to decide together. Not what happens to the throne, that's secondary. We need to decide how we approach the lords, how we present what we have, how we get the realm moving before it's too late. He said, Tyrion. She said, yes. He said, he has a plan. She said, he always has a plan. She looked at him. Do you trust him? He thought about it honestly. He said, I trust that he serves himself, and that what serves him right now is what serves you, and what serves you right now is what serves the realm. As long as those things are aligned, yes, she said. That's a complicated yes, he said. All the useful yeses are. She almost smiled. The fire in the hearth, the map on the table, the dragons somewhere outside moving through their own evening. She said, my brother Rhaegar believed the world would need someone. He said, you told me. She said, I've been thinking about it since I got your letter. About what he arranged for. About you. She looked at him. He arranged for the wrong thing. He blinked. She said, he arranged for the prince that was promised. One person, the singular hero of the prophecy. She held his gaze. But what you are isn't a single hero. You're the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch who found a dragon because he went to places most people didn't go. You're the person who wrote me a letter about the dead instead of a letter about the throne. She paused. What my brother arranged for wasn't the hero the prophecy described. It was the person who was going to figure out that the prophecy was wrong about what was needed. Jon looked at her. She said, what's needed isn't one person. It never was. She looked at the map. It's people. This specific configuration of people and dragons and information at this specific moment. She paused. Rhaegar thought the world needed a prince. The world needed us. He sat with this. He said, that's the most generous interpretation of a man who hurt a lot of people I've ever heard. She said, I've had a lot of time to make peace with my brother's choices. He said, he hurt my mother. She said, yes. He said, she chose it. She's alive. She'd tell you she chose it. He paused. That doesn't mean it didn't cost her. She said, no, it doesn't. The fire. He said, what was he like? She said, I never knew him. I was born after everything ended. What I have are stories. He said, what do the stories say? She said, that he was brilliant and sad and completely convinced he was right. She paused. That he played the harp beautifully. That he loved his wife and was fair to his people and believed in the prophecy the way some people believe in the gods. Not as a comfort, but as a weight. He said, like carrying something. She said, yes. He said, I know what that's like. She said, I know you do. The white, the demonstration, 300 AC. The lords came. Not all of them, not by a long way, but the ones who mattered for the next stage of the thing, the ones whose decisions would cascade into the decisions of the smaller houses, the ones whose agreement or refusal would set the shape of what the realm did next. Tyrion had sent the invitations, not in Jon's name or Daenerys's, in the name of a shared concern that the realm had been mismanaging for 30 years. He had been specific about the wording in a way that Jon had found instructive. You are invited to learn something that the small council has been failing to act on. Bring your own Meister if you distrust our facts. Stannis Baratheon came because Stannis followed evidence, and the evidence was compelling, and Stannis was not a man who allowed political inconvenience to overrule documented fact. Olenna Tyrell came because she had been bored since the war started, and this was the most interesting invitation she'd received in years. Several northern lords came because Jon Snow had sent personal ravens, and Jon Snow was the Lord Commander and a Targaryen and had a dragon, and those three things combined were sufficient. The demonstration was in the courtyard of Dragonstone. Jon gave no introduction. He had found in the ranging briefings at Castle Black that introductions produced the specific problem of giving people's skepticism time to organize itself. Instead, he opened the box. The white came out. The courtyard had the reaction Jon had seen twice before, and that never became less instructive. The specific moment when people who had not believed something became people who had to believe it. The sound of it was not a scream and not a gasp. It was a collective held breath, and then the release of it. He touched dragon glass to the white. The white stopped. He looked at the lords. Stannis said, "How many?" Jon said, "The cold front has moved 30 miles south in 6 months. The army behind it is—" He paused. "I've seen it from the air. The estimates from the ranging reports are conservative," Stannis said. "You've flown reconnaissance?" Jon said. "Yes," Stannis said. "How current?" Jon said. 2 weeks before I sailed here." Stannis looked at the still white. He had the expression of a man who processed facts at a speed and completeness that most people didn't manage, and who had just processed this one. He said, "How long until it reaches the wall?" Jon said, 3 months, maybe 4, Stannis said. "And the wall holds against—" Jon said, "Against the army, yes, if it's manned properly. Against the Night King himself. The accounts say he can breach it if the right conditions are met." He paused. The wall was built to hold. It wasn't built for the specific kind of assault that's coming. Olenna said, from her chair at the edge of the yard where she had positioned herself for the best view without being in the middle of anything. "What is the specific kind?" Jon said. "The Night King doesn't fight like a general. He raises the dead and he commands them. Every corpse he reaches becomes part of his army. He's been moving south for 30 years, and the army has been growing the entire time." He looked at her. The conventional response: castle walls, soldiers, cavalry, works against the soldiers and doesn't work against the source. She said, "And what works against the source?" He looked at Daenerys. She said, "Fire." Olenna looked at the dragons, 2 of which had arranged themselves at the castle's upper levels with the quality of very large animals that were not exactly choosing to be visible, but were not exactly hiding either. She said, "How much fire?" Jon said, "We have 4 dragons. We need to go north. We need to find the Night King, and we need to engage him directly." He looked at the assembled lords. "What we also need is for the rest of you to not be fighting each other while we do." A beat. He said, "The war in the south, the Lannisters and the Starks, and whatever Joffrey decides to do about any of this, none of it matters if the wall falls. All of it becomes moot. There is no kingdom to fight over if the dead win." He held their attention. "We need a ceasefire. We need resources moving north instead of toward each other. And we need it to happen now, not when the wall is already compromised." Stannis said, "You're asking us to trust a Targaryen queen and the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch." Jon said, "I'm asking you to look at what just stopped moving in this courtyard and decide whether you'd rather manage the political situation in the south or deal with that." He nodded at the white. Stannis looked at it. He said, "What do you need?" Jon told him. "Dragonstone, Tyrion and Jon. 300 AC. Tyrion found him at the cliff edge that evening. Not the inhabited edge of Dragonstone, where the castle's walls faced the harbor. The other side where the volcanic rock dropped to the sea, and the wind came from the west, and there was nothing between you and the horizon. Tyrion arrived with 2 cups and said, "You give a good demonstration." Jon said, "I've given it a few times." Tyrion handed him a cup. He said, "Stannis is convinced." He was convinced before he arrived, if I'm honest. The man processes evidence before other people have finished receiving it. He looked at the sea. Olenna is amused and therefore useful, which is the only state in which Olenna is not dangerous. He paused. The Northern Lords are loyal in the way Northern Lords are loyal, which is because they believe in something, and you've given them something to believe in. Jon said, "I've given them facts." Tyrion said, "The fact of the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch standing in a courtyard with a dragon at his back and a dead thing at his feet is not just a fact. It is a fact with considerable persuasive weight." He drank. "Don't undersell what you did today." Jon said, "I'm not selling anything." Tyrion said, "I know. That's why it worked." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "You two are going to need to figure out the succession." Jon said, "The dead. The dead are coming, and the succession still needs figuring out." Tyrion said it patiently. "Not because the lords care more about thrones than survival. Today demonstrated that they don't, at least not the ones you want. But because after, when this is done, the question of who governs the realm is going to require an answer, and the answer should be decided before someone else decides it for you." Jon said, "She should govern it." Tyrion said, "I believe you believe that." Jon said, "And?" Tyrion said, "And the lords of Westeros have just learned that there is a Targaryen king with a dragon who is also the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and who stood up in a courtyard and gave them the clearest presentation of the actual threat they've received in 30 years. He looked at Jon. "They're going to have opinions about what happens after." Jon said, "I don't want the throne." Tyrion said, "You keep saying that." Jon said, "Because it keeps being true." Tyrion said, "What do you want?" Jon thought about the conversation with Daenerys on the third night, about what he'd said then. He said, "Winterfell, the North, the Watch properly maintained." He paused. "A world where the people who should be governing it are governing it, and I don't have to manage anything except what I'm actually good at managing." Tyrion said, "What are you good at managing?" Jon said, "The cold, and the things that live in it." Tyrion looked at him. He said, "That is either the most self-aware thing I've ever heard, or the most limiting thing, and I can't determine which." Jon said, "Why not both?" Tyrion stared at him. He said, "You and she are going to get along remarkably well. It's going to be deeply inconvenient for anyone who was hoping to play you against each other." Jon said, "Good." Tyrion said, "Yes. Also, yes." He drank. "The Cersei problem," Jon said. "What about Cersei?" Tyrion said. "She's at Casterly Rock with Joffrey and the Lannister Gold and a war she's been running for a year. She's not going to stop because a white stopped moving in a courtyard she wasn't in." He paused. "She needs a specific reason to stop. The right kind of specific reason." Jon said, "What's the right kind?" Tyrion said, "Her children." He said it with the flat tone of someone reporting a fact they'd spent time being sad about, and had finished being sad about. Cersei will do anything for her children. If she understands that Joffrey's future looks very different in a world where the dead have not destroyed the realm." He paused. "The calculation changes." Jon said, "You're going to go to her?" Tyrion said, "I was planning on it anyway. She's my sister." He drank. "Someone has to talk to her, and I'm the only person on this island she might listen to." Jon said, "And Jaime?" Tyrion said, "Jaime is easier. Jaime has been waiting for a reason to do the right thing for 15 years. He just needs to be shown what the right thing is." Jon said, "Go." Tyrion said, "I'll go." He looked at the sea. "While I'm gone, you and she should work out the coordination, the tactical plan, who flies where and when." He paused. "The dragons need to know each other better than they do. 4 dragons acting without coordination is less useful than 2 acting together." Jon said, "I know." Tyrion said, "She'll have ideas." Jon said, "She always has ideas." Tyrion said, "How do you know that? You've known her 3 days." Jon said, "She reads the same way I do, like she's building something rather than filling something in." Tyrion looked at him. He said, "Lord Commander?" Jon said, "Yes." He said, "Try not to get killed before we deal with the dead. I've been waiting for someone worth planning with for most of my adult life, and I'd rather not have to start over." Jon said, "I'll try." Tyrion left. Jon stood at the cliff edge in the dark and looked at the sea. Scaros appeared from the north, coming back from wherever he'd spent the evening. He landed on the cliff behind Jon with the settled weight of an animal returning home. Jon put his hand on the dragon's flank, the warmth of him in the cold air. He thought, 3 days ago I sailed here, not knowing what to expect. I know more of what to expect now. I also know that what I expect is probably going to be wrong, because the thing I'm moving toward doesn't have a form I can recognize yet. He thought, I've been here before. At the edge of something large without the ability to see the whole of it. He thought, you do the next thing. You do the thing in front of you and you do it as well as you can. And you trust that doing it well enough gets you to the thing after. He looked north. The wall was too far to see. But the cold was there. Always there. The specific quality of air that knew what was coming. He went inside. Dragonstone. The weeks. The preparation. Tyrion went south. Stannis went north to organize the Baratheon forces toward the wall rather than toward the Lannister conflict. The Northern Lords went home to muster. Jon and Daenerys stayed at Dragonstone, and they worked. The tactical planning first, because it was urgent and because they were both built for it. The specific pleasure of two people who process information the same way finding a shared problem to process. They were on the maps for 8 hours the first day, and then they flew the scenario they'd built and revised the maps based on what the flying showed, and went back to the maps for another 4. Missandei sat in the corner, taking notes with the patient efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time, and had learned to be invisible in rooms where important things were being decided. Jorah Mormont stood at the door with the expression of a man watching something he'd been watching for a long time take a new shape. Jon noticed Jorah watching on the second day, and said, when Daenerys was out of the room, "You've been with her a long time," Jorah said. "Since Essos," Jon said. "You know her well," Jorah said. "Well enough," Jon said. "What am I missing?" Jorah looked at him. Jon said, "About her. What she needs that she doesn't say she needs." Jorah was quiet for a moment. He said, "She's been the only one for a long time. The only Targaryen. The only dragon rider. The person who carries the entire weight of it alone." He paused. "She won't say that. She's built the carrying into how she holds herself." He looked at the door. "What she needs is what you're already doing without being asked." Jon said, "What am I doing?" Jorah said, "Treating it like a shared problem. Not her problem that you're helping with. Not your problem that she's helping with." He paused. "A problem that belongs to both of you because of what you both are." Jon said, "It is a shared problem." Jorah said, "I know." He looked at Jon. "She knows. That's the point." The dragons worked. The 4 of them together, daily. The specific acclimatization of animals that share a bloodline, learning to share airspace. Drogon remained the largest and most dominant, and he established this fact once, early, with a specific aerial assertion that Jon watched and that Scaros received with the equanimity of an animal that had decided it was not interested in that particular argument and was going to make its own claim to relevance through other means. Scaros's other means were speed. Jon had suspected this from the months of flying at Castle Black, but Dragonstone gave him the comparison. Scaros was not as large as Drogon, not as powerful on the direct charge, not the overwhelming physical force that the Black Dragon represented. But Scaros moved differently. The compact efficiency of something that had been built for cold, that had been formed in the high passes beyond the wall, where the air was thin and unforgiving, and where survival required something different from pure size. Daenerys noticed on the 4th day. She said, "He's faster than the others." Jon said, "Yes." She said, "In the cold, specifically." Jon said, "He was hatched there. He's been flying in it for 10 months. He paused. "The cold doesn't slow him the way it slows the others." She said, "That's significant." He said, "I know." She said, "In the engagement beyond the wall," he said, "the colder it gets, the better he performs relative to the others." He looked at her. "The Night King's cold is going to be worse than anything we've flown in." The others will be working against it. Scaros will be... He paused. Not working with it, exactly. Not slowed by it. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "He goes for the Night King." Jon said, "Yes." She said, "You go for the Night King." He said, "Yes." She said, "The others cover the army." He said, "Yes." She said, "And I'm separated from you in the coldest part of the engagement." He said, "I know." She said, "I don't like that." He said, "I know." He held her gaze. "But it's the right deployment. Scaros and I for the source. You and the three for the army. The army can't be left alone or it overwhelms everything." She said, "If something goes wrong with you," he said, "then you finish it with what you have." She looked at him. He said, "That's what we do. We make the plan that works, and we execute it, and if part of it fails, the other part adapts." He paused. "I've been planning wall defenses for a year. The plan that works isn't the plan that protects everyone. It's the plan that solves the problem." She said, "You've been doing this since the Watch." He said, "Yes." She said, "Making the right plan instead of the comfortable one." He said, "Yes." She said, "I hate it." He said, "I know." She said, "It's correct." He said, "Yes." She looked at the map. She said, "I'm going to fight the Night King with you." He said, "Daenerys." She said, "I'm going to fight the Night King with you. Not as the distraction, not holding the army while you go for the source alone. We'll take a different split. Rhaegal and Viserion for the army. They can manage the flanks without me. Drogon and I with you and Scaros on the source." He said, She said, "The 4 dragons are a resource. How we allocate them is a decision. 2 for the army and 2 for the Night King is a valid allocation." She held his gaze. "I'm not sending you north alone." He said, "I wasn't going to be alone." She said, "I'm not sending you north without me." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "That's not tactical. That's personal." She said, "Yes." He said, "We shouldn't let personal." She said, "Jon." She looked at him steadily. "I've been alone with this my entire life. I have been the only Targaryen, the only dragon rider, the only person who understands what the blood means from the inside. And then, you appeared, and you are the only other person who understands what the blood means from the inside." She paused. "I'm not tactical about that. I'm not going to be..." He sat with this. He said, "2 for the army and 2 for the Night King." She said, "Yes." He said, "We go in together." She said, "We go in together." He said, "And we come back together." She said, "Yes." The map between them. He said, "All right." C. Asterley Rock. Tyrion and Cersei, 300 AC. The conversation at Casterly Rock was the hardest thing Tyrion had done in years. Not because Cersei was difficult. She was difficult the way water was difficult, in that it did whatever the terrain required and was impossible to permanently contain. She was difficult in the way she was always difficult, which was also to say she was the most intelligent person in most rooms, and the only person who was better at managing the specific terrain of King's Landing than she was currently at Dragonstone with a dragon. He came to her without announcement. Not because surprise was an advantage with Cersei. It wasn't. She recalibrated from surprise faster than anyone he'd ever met. But because any announcement would have been intercepted and managed before it reached her. She was in the Solar when he arrived. She said, "Tyrion." He said, "Cersei." She said, "You're alive." He said, "Your agents are better than I thought." She said, "I know where you've been." She looked at him. "Dragonstone." He said, "Yes." She said, "With the Dragon Queen." He said, "And the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch." She was very still. He said, "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to hear it before you respond." not respond while you're hearing it. He sat without being invited. I have been to 2 demonstrations of what is coming south of the wall. I have been shown a white, and I have seen the ranging reports from 30 years of Night's Watch records, and I have been briefed by the Lord Commander, who has been flying reconnaissance over the cold front on Dragonback. He looked at her. The dead are real. The army is real. The Night King is real. The wall will be compromised within the year if no one acts. She said, "This is a ploy." He said, "Cersei." He said her name with the specific flatness of someone who is done managing a person's resistance and is laying a fact on a table. "Look at me." She looked at him. He said, "I have never, in 30 years of being your brother, told you something that wasn't true when I needed you to believe it. Not once. When I came to you with something real, I was always right. You know this." He held her gaze. "I am telling you that the dead are real. I am telling you that if the wall falls, none of the rest of this," he gestured at the castle, at the Westerlands outside, at everything they'd both been fighting over, "matters. There will be nothing left to rule." She was quiet for a long time. She said, "And the Targaryen girl," he said, "is the person who has 3 of the 4 dragons required to stop what's coming?" "Yes," she said. "And the Lord Commander?" He said, "Is Rhaegar's son with the 4th dragon?" "Yes," she said. "So the succession," he said, "is a question for after. Right now, it's a question of whether there's a realm to succeed to." He looked at her. "Joffrey's future is better in a realm where the dead have been stopped. Tommen's future, Moracella's." He paused. "Your children need a living world, Cersei. That's the only thing I'm asking you to prioritize." She looked at him. She said, "What do you want from me?" He said, "A ceasefire. Immediate, unconditional, on the condition of the dead being addressed. You stop fighting the North. The North stops fighting you. Everyone turns toward the actual problem," she said. "And after," he said, "after we negotiate. The fallout, the succession, and the throne, and all of it. After." 298 She was quiet for a very long time. He watched her make the calculation. Not he knew her well enough to know when she was calculating versus when she was decided. The realm and she was calculating. The realm which meant she hadn't decided everything, which meant there was room differently, recently, based on the specific interests and loyalties and grudges that each house carried, and that each house applied to the new information through the filter of what does this mean for me? The Westerlands went want to go north. Tyrion said, "Probably," she said. "He always..." She stopped. "He always wanted to do the right thing, even when the right thing was wrong." She looked at Tyrion. "If I agree to this, if I hold the south while the rest of them go north, what happens to the throne?" Tyrion said, "Negotiation. Real negotiation, not the kind where the outcome is predetermined." She said, "Daenerys Targaryen on the throne," he said. "Possibly," she said. "And the Lord Commander," he said. "The Lord Commander wants Winterfell and a properly maintained watch. He said so publicly and in writing." She said, "You believe him?" He said, "I believe that he hasn't lied to anyone yet and has had every reason to." "Yes." She looked at the window. She said, "The children," he said. "Safe. Both scenarios. Whether Daenerys rules or whether the succession becomes a negotiation, the children are not the enemy." "I'll have that in writing if you want it," she said. "In writing means nothing," he said. "In writing from me means something. I've never broken a contract." She was quiet. She said, "I want Jaime in the north." He said, "What?" She said, "If this is real, if the dead are real, and the wall is falling, I want Jaime in the north. Not trapped at Casterly Rock, managing a war that doesn't matter anymore." She held his gaze. He deserves to die for the right thing if he's going to die. Not for me. Tyrion looked at his sister. He said, "When did you become generous?" She said, "I'm not being generous. I'm being realistic." She looked at the window. "He's been fighting my wars for 20 years. He should fight a real one once." Tyrion was quiet. He said, "I'll tell him." She said, "Tell him from me." He said, "I'll tell him from you." She turned back to him. She said, "Ceasefire, in writing. The children's safety guaranteed." She held his gaze. "And when this is over, when the dead are stopped, the negotiation is real, not a pretense." He said, "Yes." She said, "Get out, Tyrion. I have letters to write." He left. The North. The muster. 300 AC. The ravens went out from Dragonstone and from Castle Black simultaneously. Jon wrote the one from Castle Black himself. He wrote to every Northern Lord and every Stark bannerman, and he wrote it the way he wrote things that needed to be believed, which was directly, with the facts first and the ask second, and nothing softened. He wrote, "The Night King is 3 months from the wall. The dead are real. I have flown the reconnaissance. The Watch has been keeping this wall with 600 men, and we have reached the limit of what 600 men can do against what is coming. I am asking for everything you have, not because I believe in prophecy, not because I believe the right blood in the right hands changes history, because the dead are coming and the wall needs bodies, and you are the bodies I trust." He signed it, "Jon Snow, Lord Commander. You're king, if you'll have me. But Lord Commander first. Robb Stark sent back in 2 days. Every man the North can spare. I'm coming with them." Jon read Robb's letter. He thought about Winterfell and the Yard and the years of growing up beside Robb, who was his brother in every way that was real, and his cousin in every way that was blood, and who had spent the last year fighting a different war with the same determination. He wrote back, "Come, bring ice." He paused. He added, "It's good to hear from you." Robb's next letter said, "It's good to hear from you too, Your Grace." Jon looked at the letter for a long time. He thought, "I'm going to have to deal with the Your Grace eventually." He thought, after the dead. He sent back, "Jon, just Jon, Castle Black, the assembly point, 300 AC. They came. The North first, because the North believed most readily. The Northern Lords who had always known something was wrong with the wall, and who had been waiting for someone with authority and a plan. Stannis Baratheon's forces next. The Baratheon men who had been pointing at the wrong enemy, and who turned toward the wall with the efficiency of soldiers who are used to being redirected. The Tyrell contingent, smaller than Jon would have liked, because it was a long way from Highgarden to the wall, and because Olenna had sent what she could, and kept what the Reach needed to function. Jaime Lannister arrived alone. He arrived at Castle Black's gate at midday on a grey Tuesday with a single horse and his gold armor and the missing hand that was the mark of what loyalty had cost him, and he asked at the gate for the Lord Commander. Jon met him in the yard. They looked at each other. Jon said, "I heard you were coming." Jaime said, "My sister sent me." Jon said, "Why?" Jaime said, "She said I deserved to fight a real war once." He looked at the wall, at the specific, enormous reality of it. "I think she was being generous," Jon said. "She was being Cersei." Jaime looked at him. Jon said, "Tyrion told me about the conversation. She's keeping the South stable while we manage the North. That's not generous. That's the calculation of a woman who has decided what she needs from this situation." He paused. "She's protecting you by sending you somewhere you want to be. That's the part that's generous." Jaime was quiet. He said, "She said you're Rhaegar's son." Jon said, "Yes." Jaime said, He stopped. "He was a better man than people say. Also worse than people say. He was both those things at the same time." He looked at Jon. "The eyes are stark." Jon said, My mother. Jaime said. She was... He stopped again. The specific stop of someone who has many things to say about a person and is deciding which are appropriate. She was remarkable. That's the right word. He looked at Jon. She chose him. Whatever the histories say, she chose him. Jon said, I know. Jaime said, I was Kingsguard. I should have. There were things I should have done differently. He looked at his missing hand. There are a lot of those. Jon said, you can do something useful with this one. Jaime looked at him. Jon said, you're the finest swordsman in the realm. One-handed. He held his gaze. I need fighters who know what they're doing in the cold. Can you fight in winter gear? Jaime said, I'll learn. Jon said, good. He turned. Come, I'll show you what we're dealing with. He showed him. Castle Black. Rob Ruby. The night he arrived. Rob arrived a week before Daenerys. He came with 8,000 northern men and a face that had aged 3 years in one, the specific cost of a year of war and the specific additional cost of being Robb Stark, which was carrying everything without complaint and therefore carrying it on your face. He came through the Castle Black Gate and he saw Jon on the battlements above the yard and he stopped. Jon came down. They stood in the yard. Robb said, you have a dragon? Jon said, yes. Robb said, named Scaros. Jon said, yes. Robb said, which means iron in High Valyrian. Jon said, you've been reading. Robb said, since your first raven, I've been reading everything I could find. He looked at the dragon, who was in the yard with the settled quality of a very large animal that owned its space. He's bigger than I expected, Jon said. He's been growing for 10 months. Robb said, right. He looked at Scaros for a long moment. Then he looked at Jon. You should have told me. Jon said, about which part? Robb said, any of it. The blood, the dragon, He stopped. He had the Stark face, the one that didn't show everything but that Jon had been reading for his whole life. Father kept the secret because he had to. You kept it because you chose to. Jon said, yes. Robb said, that's different. Jon said, I know. Robb said, why? Jon looked at the yard, at the Watch Brothers moving through it with the routine efficiency of men who had learned to share their walls with a dragon, at the northern soldiers who had arrived and were looking at everything with the assessment of men arriving somewhere strange and making it familiar. He said, because the secret was a weapon. The blood claim and the dragon together are a very specific political weapon, and once you know a weapon exists, you start seeing the situations where you might use it. He held Robb's gaze. I didn't want anyone seeing those situations. I didn't want anyone, including you, making decisions about the dead based on what was politically useful about me. Robb said, I wouldn't have. Jon said, you would have tried not to. You're better at separating politics from judgment than most people. He paused. But it would have been present. The knowledge. It would have been in every conversation. He held his brother's gaze. I needed the conversations to be about the dead. Robb was quiet. He said, they were. For me, anyway. He looked at Jon. I've been fighting a war for a year. A political war. Joffrey and Cersei and the succession and what kind of realm we're going to have. He paused. And the whole time I've been reading your ravens about the cold front and the ranging reports and thinking, this is the real war. The other one is a distraction. Jon said, I know. Robb said, how long have you known about Daenerys? Jon said, Sam told me after the hatching. I found the letter about her in the Watch's intelligence from the same contact who told us about the ceasefire. Robb said, and you wrote to her? Jon said, yes. Robb said. Without telling anyone, Jon said. I told Aemon before he died. He thought it was the right move. Robb was quiet for a moment. He said, What is she like? Jon said. Not what you expect, Robb said. What do I expect? Jon said. Someone who wants the throne and is using the dead as a pretext to get it, Robb said. And what is she actually? Jon thought about the third night at Dragonstone, about the conversation by the fire and the ranging reports spread between them and her question. What do you want? And his answer, and her answer to his answer. He said, someone who has been carrying the same weight I've been carrying, from a different direction for longer. Someone who built everything toward a specific destination and arrived at the destination and found that the destination was more complicated and larger and more worth doing than the simplified version she'd been building toward. Robb said, You trust her? Jon said, I trust the specific configuration of what she wants and what I want and what the dead require and how those three things align. He held his gaze. Yes, I trust her. Robb said, Right. He looked at the wall above them, at the specific, enormous fact of it. I'm going to need to meet her, Jon said. She arrives in a week. Robb said, I'll be here. He was here. He stood in the castle black yard when Daenerys arrived with 3 dragons, and he watched the arrival with the expression of a man who had been reading about this moment for a year and was now in it. He watched the way Jon went to meet her. He watched them stand in the yard and look at each other with the ease of 2 people who have already done the hard work of figuring each other out and are now past it. He watched her look at the wall. He thought, Jon was right. She's not what I expected. He went to introduce himself. The wall. Daenerys arrives. She arrived from the south with 3 dragons. Jon watched her come from the battlements. The sight of it, 3 dragons from the south approaching the wall with the morning light behind them, was something that had no precedent in the living memory of anyone at Castle Black, and that produced, in the assembled brothers of the Watch and the northern soldiers, and Stannis' men, and everyone else who happened to be on the wall or in the yard, a silence that was not fear and not awe, and was something older than both. She landed Drogon in the yard. The 3 other dragons arranged themselves on the wall and the towers with the specific quality of animals that have understood the strategic situation. She got down. She looked at the wall. He had seen, at Dragonstone, the way she looked at things she found genuinely large. He saw it now, the same quality, but more complete, because the wall was genuinely large in a way that Dragonstone, for all its atmosphere, was not. She said, I understand now. He said, What? She said, Why you are the way you are. She looked at it. You've been keeping this your whole life, standing in front of this. He said, Not my whole life. A few years. She said, Long enough. She turned. Show me everything. He showed her everything. The ranging reports, updated. The cold front's position, 2 weeks current from the last flight. The specific gap between what they had and what the threat required. She listened with the attention she always brought, and she asked the same quality of questions she always asked. And by the end of the briefing, she had the picture clearly in a way that took most people 3 sessions to build. Mormont sat in the corner and watched her absorb it. Jon watched Mormont watch her. He thought, the man has been waiting for someone to take this seriously for 20 years. He's now in a room with 2 Targaryens and 4 dragons and the full force of a mobilized response. He doesn't know what to do with that. He thought, I know the feeling. After the briefing, she went to the top of the wall. Not with him. She asked for it alone, and he gave it to her. He understood. The wall required its own accounting. He'd needed to stand at the top of it alone before he could do anything else. She came back an hour later. She said, We go north tomorrow. He said, Yes. She said, The cold is closer than your last report, he said. I know, she said. You felt it too, he said. Scaros has been oriented north since we arrived. He knows where it is, she said. Then let him lead, he said. Yes. The night before, the wall. He found the place on the wall where the cold pressed clearest. There was a spot on the eastern reach of the battlements where the directional cold, the organized cold, the cold that was not weather, came through strongest, where you could feel the shape of it rather than just the ambient temperature. He'd found it in his first week as Lord Commander and had come back to it regularly since then, standing with it the way you stood with the thing you were afraid of, because familiarity was not the same as comfort, but was the step before it. She found him there. He wasn't surprised. She stood beside him. The north spread out below the wall, the forests and the mountains and the dark of everything that was coming from deeper in that dark. The sky was clear in the way winter skies were clear, which was absolutely, without the softening of cloud, the stars very present and very cold. She said, "Are you afraid?" He said, "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. "You said that like you mean it," she said. "I've been afraid since I was born. I was born into a dynasty that had already ended. I've been afraid of getting it wrong since before I understood what getting it wrong looked like." She looked at the north. "The fear is useful. I stopped trying to not be afraid years ago and started trying to be afraid and moving anyway." He said, "That's what it is." She said, "Yes," he said. "After." She said, "What?" He said, "After the dead are stopped. After the realm is stable. After." He paused. "I want to take you to Winterfell." She looked at him. He said, "I want to show you where I grew up, where I learned what the north is." He held her gaze. "You've been building toward Westeros your whole life from outside it. I grew up inside it, in the specific northern inside of it, that is. It's different from what the south is. I want you to know what you're governing." She said, "That's a long time away." He said, "Yes." He looked north. "But I'm going to think about it. While we're up there, I'm going to have something to think about that isn't just the dead." She was quiet. She said, "What else do you want after?" He said, "I told Tyrion." She said, "Tell me." He said, "Winterfell, the north safe, the watch, what it should be." He paused. "You on the throne, governing the realm the way you've been building toward," she said. "And you," he said, "beside you. Not on the throne, beside it." He met her eyes. "The way you fight in the air, you don't need someone to match you. You need someone who fills the gaps, someone who goes where you can't go and does the specific thing you can't do." He paused. "You're the queen. I'm the person who goes where no one else will go." She said, "That's not a diminishment." He said, "I know." She said, "Most men would hear that as a diminishment." He said, "I'm not most men." She said, "No, you're not." She looked at the north. "The thing you described, being beside rather than instead." She paused. "That's what I have with Missandei, with Jorah. What I've been building for years." He said, "Yes," she said. "You're describing the thing I've needed and haven't been able to find with someone who shares what I am." He said, "Yes." She looked at him. She said, "You arrived 3 weeks ago?" He said, "I know." She said, "This is very fast," he said. "Things happen fast when the dead are coming." She said, "Is that what this is?" He said, "No." He held her gaze. "I know the difference between urgency and something real. This is something real." She looked at the north. She said, "After the dead." He said, "After the dead." She said, "Show me Winterfell." He said, "Yes." They stood at the wall together. The cold pressed at them from the north. They held. Dawn. Beyond the wall. The engagement. They crossed the wall at first light. 4 dragons and their riders, and below them the combined force. The Watch and the Northern Lords and Stannis' men and Jaime's Lannister soldiers and the specific mixed army of people who had looked at a white stopping in a courtyard and had decided the calculation had changed. Scaros oriented north immediately. He'd been doing it since they arrived at the wall, but now he did it with the focused purposefulness of an animal that had found the scent. Jon felt it in the dragon's body, the tightening of everything, the shift from patrol posture to the something is there orientation. He looked at Daenerys. She looked back. He nodded. She nodded. They split. Rhaegal and Viserion, with the unsullied commanders on the secondary riders Daenerys had been training, turned toward the army's flanks. The mass of the dead that was already visible from altitude, the enormous moving field of organized bodies that was everything the ranging reports had been building toward. Drogon turned with Jon and Scaros toward the source. They flew north. The cold intensified. Jon felt it in the way he'd felt it on the wall. The directional pressure of it. The cold that was a function of will rather than weather. The cold that had been building for 30 years and was now everything it was going to be. Scaros flew into it. Not without difficulty. The air got heavy, the way it got heavy at altitude, but different. Thicker with the specific resistance of something that was pushing back. The dragon worked harder, the wings making the calculated adjustments of an animal that had been built for this. Jon kept his hands steady and let Scaros navigate. Behind him, Drogon's enormous wingspan held the air with the force of the largest living thing in the world, pushing against something that would have stopped anything smaller. They found the Night King at the center of the cold. It was. Jon had read the accounts. He had the word for it, the Night King. He had the history of it, the 8,000 years of it, the fact of it. He had been building toward this for months. Encountering it was still nothing like the reading. The cold that came from the Night King was not metaphor. It was a physical property of the air in a radius around him, a cold that was not temperature, but the specific thermodynamic quality of something that had decided the normal rules of heat and life and continuation did not apply to it. The dead around it moved with the organized deliberateness of something being directed rather than something that wanted to move. The Night King looked up. It saw them. Jon felt Scaros orient, the body of the dragon sharpening in the specific way that meant the dragon understood what it was looking at. He looked at Daenerys. She looked at him. He said, "Together." She said, "Together." They dove. The engagement. What happened? The Night King moved. Faster than the accounts. Faster than anything that size should move, with the specific inhuman economy of something that did not waste energy on fear or hesitation. It moved away from Scaros's approach and toward something else. Toward Drogon. Jon understood the tactic immediately. Not engage the faster dragon on the direct approach, force the other rider to respond, split the coordinated attack. He said, shouting across the air, "Daenerys!" She had already seen it. She pulled Drogon sideways in a maneuver that cost distance, but preserved the line, keeping Drogon out of the Night King's reach while Jon and Scaros came around the far side. The Night King turned. 3 directions, Jon and Scaros from the north, Daenerys and Drogon from the south, the fire already starting. The Night King raised its hand. Ice formed in the air in a way that wasn't natural, not the gradual ice of temperature, but instant, purposeful, a weapon. Daenerys pulled Drogon up, and the ice missed. Jon felt Scaros bank hard left, and he held the position with the months of practice it had taken to be able to hold a position like this, the committed bank, the trust, the not bracing. He drew Longclaw, the Valyrian steel in the cold. The Night King looked at the sword. Something changed in the quality of the cold around it. Jon thought, it knows. It's been here before, and it knows what this means. He thought, good. He committed. Scaros dove. The Night King moved again. The same sideways movement, the same inhuman economy. Daenerys came from the other side. Drogon's fire hit. Not the Night King. The ice the Night King had been forming. The weapon in the air. The cold architecture of it. The fire consumed the cold the way fire and cold consume each other when they meet, completely, neither surviving the contact. The Night King stumbled. Not fell. Stumbled. The specific loss of balance of something whose environment had changed unexpectedly. Jon was already there. Longclaw found the Night King. The accounts were consistent, and he had read them 3 times, and they were still not adequate preparation for the specific reality of the Night King stopping. Not falling. Stopping. The cessation of something that had been running for 8,000 years. Complete. Absolute. The cold retreated. Not gradually, the way a fire went out when you removed its fuel. Instant. Total. The quality of the air returning to just cold. Northern cold. The cold of the deep winter north that was simply temperature and not will. The dead stopped. Every white in the engagement. The ones on the flanks where Rhaegal and Viserion were working. The ones in the army below. The ones on the periphery of the engagement. All of them. The stopping was the loudest thing Jon had ever heard, which was strange because it was the absence of sound. The dead had been making a kind of sound without noise, the resonance of organized wrong movement, and when it stopped, the silence was enormous. Scaros landed on the frozen ground beside the Night King. Jon got down. He stood in the cold that was just cold. Daenerys brought Drogon down 20 feet away. She got down. She walked to him across the still field. She said, "Is it over?" He looked at the north. At the deep north where the cold front had been building for 30 years and was now just landscape. He said, "I think so." She said, "Think so isn't..." He said, "Scaros." He looked at the dragon. "He's oriented south." She looked at Scaros. The dragon, which had been pointing north since they crossed the wall, was looking south. At the wall. At the direction of home. Daenerys said, "Oh." He said, "Yes." She exhaled. He put his hand out. She took it. They stood in the field in the cold that was just cold, and they held on. Castle Black. Jaime and Jon, the night of the battle. Jaime found him at the well in the Castle Black yard at some hour in the deep night. Jon had come out because the specific quality of the silence in the aftermath of the dead stopping was something he needed space to be in. Not people, and not walls. The yard was empty except for him. And the cold was just cold. And the wall above them was 700 feet of ancient ice that had held and was going to keep holding. Jaime came out and found him there and said, "Couldn't sleep." Jon said, "No." Jaime said, "Neither could I." He sat on the well's edge. First real fight in 2 years. The hand... He looked at the empty place where his right hand had been. The fighting style has changed. Still works. Just different. Jon said, "You fought well." Jaime said, "I fought like someone who was recalculating every 10 seconds. He looked at the gate that led north. The dead fight differently. They don't hesitate. They don't tire. He paused. "I've been fighting people my whole life. People hesitate. People tire. People make mistakes." He paused. "The dead are honest in a way people aren't." Jon said, "Yes." Jaime said, "Cersei would hate that I said that." Jon almost smiled. Jaime said, "She'd say the dead lack artistry. She values artistry." Jon said, "Does she?" Jaime said, "She would never do something simply when it could be done elaborately. It's her best quality and her worst one simultaneously." He looked at the wall. "She sent me here because she knew I needed to be here. She'd never admit that." Jon said, "Why not?" Jaime said, "Because admitting it would mean admitting she sees me clearly. And Cersei doesn't give people the knowledge that she sees them clearly. It's a vulnerability." Jon said, "You see her clearly." Jaime said, "I've seen her clearly my whole life. It's not always useful." He looked at Jon. "Your father, Rhaegar. He saw my father's king clearly. He saw what Aerys was becoming long before anyone else would admit it. He paused. He didn't do anything about it. Jon said. I know. Jaime said. Seeing something clearly and acting on it are different. He held his gaze. I killed Aerys. I sat on his throne and waited for Ned Stark to come through the door, and I let him think what he thought, because I was tired, and I didn't know how to explain it. He paused. I've regretted that for 15 years. Not the killing, the sitting, the letting someone who mattered believe something wrong. Jon said, Ned told Rob, before he died, that the judgment of you was too simple, that he hadn't asked the right questions. Jaime looked at him. Jon said, he'd been thinking about it for years. What he'd seen in the throne room, and what it meant. He held Jaime's gaze. He would have said it to your face if he'd had time. Jaime was very still. He said, he was the most honorable man I ever met. Jon said, yes. Jaime said, and he thought I was... Jon said, he thought the whole picture was more complicated than the version everyone was telling. He paused. He usually saw things that way. Jaime looked at the well. He said, your mother. Jon said, what about her? Jaime said, she's alive. Jon said, yes, at Winterfell. Jaime said, I was Kingsguard when Rhaegar. He stopped. I should have done something. I've thought about that too. He looked at his hand. I spent the rebellion doing what I was told, and not asking whether what I was told was right. Jon said, Aerys gave the order for the wildfire. Jaime said, yes. Jon said, and you killed him for it. Jaime said, yes. Jon said, that's not someone who does what they're told without asking whether it's right. He held his gaze. That's someone who asks the question and acts on the answer at the worst possible moment. That's extremely costly courage. Jaime looked at him. He said, you're very strange. Jon said, I get that. Jaime said, you're your father's son. The bearing. Something about the way you hold your ground. He paused. But the way you think is entirely someone else's. Jon said, my mother taught me. Jaime said, Lyanna Stark. Jon said, yes. Jaime said, the Starks teach their children to hold the difficult thing and say it plainly. Jon said, yes. Jaime said, it's either very admirable or very inconvenient for everyone around them. Jon said, usually both. Jaime said, both. He almost smiled. I'd like to meet her, your mother. He paused. If she's willing. Jon said, I'll ask her. She'll have opinions about you. She has opinions about everyone. Jaime said, is that? Jon said, it's a good thing. She forms accurate opinions and then she adjusts them when the evidence changes. He looked at the wall. She'll have adjusted already. She pays attention. Jaime said, right. He stood. The dead are stopped. Jon said, yes. Jaime said, that's what we came here to do. Jon said, yes. Jaime said, I'm going to go south in the morning. He held Jon's gaze. I have things to manage at Casterly Rock. The children to see to. Cersei to. He stopped. Cersei to have a conversation with that we should have had years ago. Jon said, good luck. Jaime said, with Cersei. Jon said, with all of it. Jaime said, yes. He turned, stopped. Lord Commander. Jon said, Jon. Jaime said, Jon. He held his gaze. Thank you for what you said about your father, about what he thought. He paused. It matters. More than is useful to admit. Jon said, I know. Jaime went inside. Jon stayed at the well. He looked at the wall. He thought about all the people who had done the thing that needed doing and paid the price for it and been understood wrong by the histories. He thought about Jaime sitting on Aerys's throne, waiting for Ned to come through the door. He thought about what it cost to make the right choice at the wrong moment. He thought, The histories are always too simple. He thought, I'll try to make the record better. He went inside. The return. What was left? They came back over the wall at midday. The army below was standing in the aftermath of the dead going still. The specific, stunned quiet of people who had been fighting something and had watched it stop simultaneously everywhere at once. Jon could see Robb from the air, on horseback, looking up at the 4 dragons coming south. He could see Robb's face when he recognized him. He brought Scaros down in the yard. Robb was there. Jon got down from the dragon, and his brother, his cousin, technically, but the word had never fit the relationship, was standing in the castle black yard and looking at him with the expression of a man who had prepared himself for several possible outcomes and was not certain which one had happened. Jon said, "It's done." Robb said, "Done." Jon said, "The Night King is gone. The dead stop." He looked at the wall. The wall holds. Robb looked at him, something working on his face. He said, "You should have told me." Jon said, "About?" Robb said, "All of it. The blood. The dragon. What you are." He held his gaze. "You could have." Jon said, "I know." Robb said, "I would have." Jon said, "I know." He held his brother's gaze. "You would have made it about me, about protecting me, about what I was owed." He paused. "I needed it to be about the wall, about what was coming. I needed everyone looking at the right thing." Robb was quiet. He said, "You're frustrating." Jon said, "I know." Robb said, "Also correct." Jon said, "Usually." Robb looked at Daenerys, who had come to stand beside Jon with Drogon a shadow behind her. He said, "Your Grace." She said, "Robb Stark, your brother saved the world." Robb said, "He's my cousin, technically." She said, "He told me he's always been your brother." Robb looked at Jon. Jon said, "It's the right word." Robb was quiet for a moment. He said, "Right." He put his hand on Jon's shoulder. "Come inside. You both look terrible. The Maester needs to look at..." He noticed Jon's arm. "When did that happen?" Jon said, "I don't know." "Battle," Robb said. "The Maester looks at it first, then everything else." He went inside. Jon looked at Daenerys. She said, "He's very like you." He said, "He's louder." She said, "You're both stubborn." He said, "Starks." She said, "Yes." She almost smiled. "Come." The Maester. They went inside. After what followed. The political aftermath was slower than the battle and harder in different ways. Tyrion managed most of it, which was what Tyrion was for. The ceasefire held, because Cersei had decided to hold it, and when Cersei decided something it held. Joffrey was sent to Essos before he could cause problems, which he went to with the sullen energy of someone who had been managed rather than persuaded and knew it. Jaime stayed north for a month after the battle and then rode south, and the letter he sent to Jon from the road said only, "Tell her I understand now." Jon assumed he meant Cersei and filed it in the category of things that were probably true and not his to navigate. Stannis bent the knee at Castle Black in a ceremony that was functional rather than ceremonial, because that was how Stannis did everything, and what he said was, "I serve whoever best serves the realm." Daenerys had said, "I intend to." He had looked at her for a long moment and nodded once. The Lord's Council that determined the shape of what came after was held at Dragonstone, because Dragonstone was hers, and the location was the statement. Jon sat at the table as the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and as whatever else he was, and he was not particularly interested in debating the latter. Tyrion opened the council by saying, "The succession is the Queen and the Lord Commander in whatever arrangement they determine. Anyone who wants to argue about birth order is welcome to do so. At a council, the Night King is no longer available to interrupt." Nobody argued about birth order. The arrangement Daenerys and Jon had discussed on the battlements of Castle Black the night before the engagement became, broadly, the arrangement that the council accepted. She ruled, he served in the specific way that filling the gaps served. The North was sovereign, the Watch was crown-funded and properly maintained. The specific terms that made the realm functional rather than the terms that made anyone maximally happy. Nothing made everyone maximally happy. Everything made most people adequately served. Tyrion said this was the best outcome any council had produced in his experience. Olenna Tyrell, who had remained at Dragonstone throughout on the grounds, that it was warmer than King's Landing in winter, and more interesting than Highgarden at any time of year, said, "That's a very low bar." Tyrion said, "Most bars worth clearing are low when you look at them from the right angle." Olenna said, "I'm going to have that on my tombstone." Winterfell, the promise kept, 301 AC. He took her to Winterfell in the spring. Not alone, they travelled with a retinue because they were people who had retinues now, and the retinues required management. But they arrived at Winterfell ahead of the retinue, which was easy when you could fly. He landed Scaros in the yard. She landed Drogon beside him. He stood in the Winterfell yard and looked at the castle that he'd grown up in, and that was the most familiar place in the world to him. And that was, somehow, both smaller and larger than he remembered. She stood beside him. She looked at Winterfell. He said, "The hot springs are underground. The castle is warmer than it should be. That's why the yard isn't all ice." He looked at the walls. The crypts go deep. The Starks are buried there, going back 8,000 years. She said, 8,000 years? He said, the same number as the wall. She looked at the castle, at the grey stone and the towers, and the smoke coming from the great hall where someone was keeping the fire. She said, "It feels like the North." He said, "It is the North." She said, "I mean, it feels like the specific thing you mean when you say the North." She looked at him. "Not just geography, something else." He said, "Something about holding, something about endurance." He paused. "This castle has been here through winter after winter. The Starks have been here holding it. The people in it have been doing the ordinary work of living in a hard place for a very long time." She said, "Like the wall." He said, "Like the wall." She looked at the yard. She said, "Catelyn Stark." He said, "In the Great Hall." She said, "You should go to her first." He looked at her. She said, "She raised you. She managed the complications of what you were alongside everything else she was managing. She deserves to see you first." She paused. "I'll be here," he said. "You don't have to," she said. "I know. I want to." She looked at the dragons who had settled on the towers with the specific proprietary quality of very large animals that have decided where they are staying. "I want to stand in this yard and look at this castle for a while. Understand what you came from," he said. "It's cold," she said. "I have Drogon." He looked at her. She said, "Go." He went. Winterfell. Ned's crypt. He went to the crypt before he went to the Great Hall. He went to the crypt because there was a conversation he'd been needing to have for years, and the crypt was where you had it. Ned Stark's tomb was where it was, the place that had been prepared while Ned was alive in the northern way of being prepared. And Jon stood in front of it with a torch and the specific cold of deep underground, which was not the wrong cold, just the honest cold of stone that hadn't seen the sun. He said, "I found a dragon." He said it to the stone the way you said things to the stone when the person wasn't there anymore, and the stone was what you had. He said, "I know it's not what you were planning. I know when you carried the secret, you weren't picturing this." He looked at the carved face, which was a face that looked like Ned, the way carvings always looked like people, approximately, with the dignity that stone provided, and the specificity that stone lacked. "I know you would have found a way to make this work. You made everything work. You made impossible things work by being stubborn enough that the impossible things gave up." He was quiet. He said, "She's outside." In the yard, She wanted to look at the castle. He paused. She would have liked you. She makes the same quality of decisions you made. The ones where the right thing is also the hard thing. She'd have recognized it. He said, I'm going to keep the name. Jon Snow. Not the other one. He paused. I know what the other one means, and I know what using it would say. I'm saying something different. He held the torch. I'm saying I'm the person you made me. I'm saying the person you made was worth making. I'm saying the 15 years of carrying the secret cost you everything, and I am not going to make that mean nothing by abandoning what the carrying produced. He said, thank you. He said it to the stone, to the carved face, to the man who had spent 15 years lying to everyone he loved to protect the one thing he'd promised to protect. He stood there for a while. Then he went up. He went to the great hall, and Catelyn Stark was there, and she was alive, and she looked at him with the expression she always had with him, which was the complicated one, the one that was never entirely comfortable, and that had never managed to be unkind. He said, I should have written more. She said, yes. He said, I'm sorry. She looked at him, at the Lord Commander's cloak, which he still wore, because he was still the Lord Commander, and the Valyrian steel at his hip, and whatever the months since Castle Black had done to his face. She said, you saved the wall. He said, we saved the wall. She said, the Dragon Queen. He said, yes. She said, Ned would have. She stopped. Something crossing her face that was not entirely grief. He would have said I told you so about something. I'm not sure what. She looked at the fire. He always believed the watch reports, long before anyone else would. Jon said, I know. She said, is she outside? Jon said, in the yard. Catelyn looked at him. He said, she wanted to give us the hall. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I'll have someone bring her in. It's cold. He said, she has a dragon. She said, even so. She went to have someone bring Daenerys in. Jon stood in the great hall of Winterfell. He looked at the fire. He thought, this is what everything was for. Not the throne, not the dynasty, not the prophecy. This specific room, this specific fire, the dead stopped, and the cold retreating, and people coming in from the yard. He thought, that's enough. He thought, it's more than enough. Ghost came in from somewhere and lay down at his feet. Daenerys came in from the yard. She looked at the great hall. She said, it's warmer than I expected. He said, hot springs. She said, I know, you told me. She looked around the hall, at the stones and the fire, and the specific, lived-in quality of a place that had been sheltering people for 8,000 years. It feels... She stopped. He said, what? She said, like somewhere I could learn to know. He looked at her. She said, not like somewhere I've been, like somewhere I haven't been yet. Something to understand rather than claim. She held his gaze. Is that? He said, yes, that's exactly it. She looked at the fire. He looked at the fire. The dragons were on the towers outside, and Ghost was at their feet, and Winterfell was doing what Winterfell did, which was being exactly what it was, warm in the cold, built for endurance, older than anything that had tried to threaten it. What if Jon Snow bonded with a dragon before meeting Daenerys? He didn't go looking for it. He went north because the reports said something was wrong, and he was the person who went to places most people didn't go. And he found an egg in a rock crevice because he was looking carefully, and he brought it back because he didn't know what else to do with it. And it hatched, because it was ready. He kept it hidden for 2 weeks, because he needed time to think. He needed time to think because he had been doing competence as a way of not doing the other thing, which was figuring out what he actually wanted, and the dragon forced the other thing. He went to Daenerys not with a claim or a demand or a political position. He went with a box and 30 years of ranging reports, and the clear, specific ask of a man who needed something he couldn't provide himself, and who understood what she had that he needed. She read the reports. She met him at the dock in plain clothes, and she looked at him, and she said, "You're shorter than I thought." That was the beginning. The rest was two people from the same blood, finding out that the things that had made them strange in every other context made them, for the first time, entirely normal in each other's company. The carrying they'd each been doing alone for their whole lives was not less heavy in the sharing, but was differently distributed. And differently distributed was the difference between sustainable and not. 4 dragons, Valyrian steel, the specific right configuration of people at the specific right moment, doing the thing that needed doing. Not destiny, not one prince promised. A Lord Commander who found an egg in a rock crevice, and a queen who read 30 years of reports, and both of them deciding that the dead were more important than the throne. The dead were stopped. The wall held. Scaros oriented south. They went home. Castle Black, Ed. The watch carries on. 3 days after the battle, Ed came to Jon with the ranging report. It was routine. The first routine ranging report since the engagement, which made it not routine at all. The first report from the deep north that described nothing because there was nothing there. The first accounting of the land beyond the wall that had no direction to it, no cold front, no organized wrong thing moving south. Just the north. Just what it was. Ed put the report on the table and said, "Nothing." Jon read it. He said, "Nothing." Ed said, "The ranging party went 20 miles north, and they found nothing except trees and the specific quality of silence that you get when nothing is eating you." Jon said, "How did they describe the quality of the silence?" Ed said, "Cold, but normal. Their words." He paused. Old Henderson, who's been ranging for 15 years, said it was the first time beyond the wall in 10 years that he hadn't felt watched. Jon read the report again. He said, "The watch keeps ranging." Ed said, "Obviously." Jon said, "The wall keeps being manned." Ed said, "Obviously." Jon said, "The specific maintenance routine." Ed said, "Jon." Jon stopped. Ed said, "I've been doing this since before you were Lord Commander. I know what the wall requires." He looked at Jon with the expression of a man who had spent years performing long-suffering patience and had now earned the right to drop the performance slightly. The watch is going to be fine. The ranging is going to happen. The records are going to be kept. He held Jon's gaze. "You can go." Jon said, "I haven't said I'm going." Ed said, "Sam told me about the conversation you had the night before you sailed south, about how the watch needs someone who believes in it when you're not here." He paused. "I believe in it. I've believed in it for 15 years, mostly because I was here and there was nowhere else to go, but also because it matters." He looked at the report. "Go manage the realm. I'll manage the wall." Jon said, "You don't want to be Lord Commander?" Ed said, "No, but I'll do it until someone better turns up." He paused. Sam thinks the funding from the Crown is going to mean we can actually recruit rather than wait for criminals to be offered a choice. He paused. "Actual volunteers. People who choose to be here." Jon said, "Yes." Ed said, "That's going to change the watch." Jon said, "Yes." Ed said, "I'm looking forward to it." Jon looked at him. Ed said, "I'm allowed to look forward to things. The dead are stopped. I'm looking forward to things." Jon said, "Good." He looked at the ranging report. "Send me a copy of every report." Ed said, "Every one." Jon said, "Unedited." Ed said, "You'll read them all." Jon said, "Yes." Ed said, "Of course you will." He picked up the report. He turned to go. He stopped. "Jon." Jon said, "Yes." Ed said, "The first morning you were Lord Commander, you came to the yard before dawn and you looked at the wall like you were memorizing it." Jon said, "I remember." Ed said, "I thought, he knows what he's got. He knows what this is. He paused. A lot of Lord Commanders looked at the wall like it was a burden. You looked at it like it was worth the looking. He held Jon's gaze. That's what made you good at this. Jon said nothing. Ed said, "Right, the watch carries on." He went. Jon stood in the Lord Commander's quarters. He looked at the wall through the window. Worth the looking. He thought, yes, that's exactly it. That's what I want to tell everyone who looks south and sees the wall as the place you send people you don't want. It's worth the looking. It has always been worth the looking. He thought, I'll make sure it's written down. He went to write it down. Winterfell. Lyanna. The meeting. 301 AC. He had not prepared Daenerys for Lyanna. He had told her, "My mother is at Winterfell. She has strong opinions. She'll have already formed an assessment of you before you've said a word. The assessment will be accurate." Daenerys had said, "I've managed difficult women before." Jon had said, "She's not difficult. She's honest." Daenerys had said, "Those are the same thing." He had said, "Those are very different things." He had been right. Lyanna met Daenerys in the Great Hall. She stood beside the fire, and she looked at the woman who had ridden a dragon from Essos to the wall, and had helped her son stop the dead, and who was now standing in Winterfell's hall, with her silver hair and her violet eyes that were Rhaegar's family's eyes, and she looked at her for a long time. Daenerys looked back. Neither of them spoke first, which Jon had not expected. He had expected his mother to open with the direct Lyanna approach, the honest assessment delivered immediately. She was measuring something instead. Daenerys was measuring back. Jon stood to the side and waited. Finally, Lyanna said, "He told you about his father." Daenerys said, "He told me everything." Lyanna said, "Did he tell you it wasn't what the histories say?" Daenerys said, "He told me what it actually was." She held Lyanna's gaze. "He told me his mother chose." Lyanna said, "I chose." Daenerys said, "I know," Lyanna said. "The world doesn't say it that way." Daenerys said, "The world gets a lot of things wrong." Something moved across Lyanna's face. Not warmth, not exactly. The specific thing that happened when you encountered someone saying the right thing without performing it. She said, "You're like him." Daenerys said, "Which one?" Lyanna said, "Both of them, in different ways." She looked at Jon. "She has your directness." Jon said, "She has her own directness." Lyanna said, "They're the same directness." She looked back at Daenerys. "Ned had it. Rhaegar had it in a different key. You have it. Jon has it." She paused. "The Starks got it from somewhere in the old blood, and the Targaryens got it from somewhere else, and it's the same quality, regardless of which direction it came from." Daenerys said, "What quality is it?" Lyanna said, "The refusal to pretend you don't know what you know." She held Daenerys's gaze. "Most people manage their knowledge. They decide what they know based on what's comfortable to know." She paused. "You don't do that." Daenerys said, "No." Lyanna said, "Neither does he." She looked at Jon. "I was afraid when he was young that the North would soften it, that the weight of being what he was and not being allowed to say it would make him careful in the wrong way, cautious where he should have been direct." Jon said, "It didn't." Lyanna said, "No." She almost smiled. "You came out like your father in the wrong ways and like me in the right ones." She looked at Daenerys again. "She's right for you. I'm saying that before she does the thing she came here to do, which is prove it herself without being told." Daenerys said, "Is that what I'm doing?" Lyanna said, "Yes." She paused. "I know, because I would have done the same." Daenerys said, "What are you afraid of?" Lyanna looked at her. Daenerys said, "You're assessing me for something specific. You're not afraid I'll hurt him. You believe he can manage himself." She held Lyanna's gaze. What are you afraid of?" Lyanna was quiet for a moment. She said, "That the realm will make him into something other than what he is. That the court and the politics and the specific weight of being what his blood says he is will—" She stopped. "That the thing I built will get lost in what the world makes of it." Daenerys said, "What did you build?" Lyanna said, "Someone who knows what things are for." Daenerys looked at Jon. He held her gaze. She said to Lyanna, "I know what he is. I've known since we were 3 days into knowing each other." She looked back at the older woman. "He won't get lost. He doesn't get lost." Lyanna looked at her for a long moment. She said, "No, he doesn't." She turned. "Come, I'll show you the castle." She walked toward the far corridor. Daenerys followed. Jon watched them go. He thought, that was better than expected. He thought, I should have expected that. They're both very good at finding the real conversation. He went to find Rob and tell him the North's future was probably going to be fine. The record, what Jon wrote. He went back to Castle Black once more before the year was out. Not for the watch, Ed had it. Not for the ranging, Sam was maintaining the record. He went back because there was something he'd been meaning to do since Aemon died, and that the months of aftermath had kept pushing to later. He sat at the Meister's desk in the Castle Black library, the same desk where Aemon had sat for 60 years. The same view. The wall, the yard, the specific northern sky that did not perform. He wrote the record of the Night King's defeat. Not the official version. That would be written by the Meisters who came to interview the survivors and who would produce something polished and authorized and necessarily simplified. He wrote the real one, the version that included the ranging reports and the egg in the rock crevice and the 2 weeks of keeping it hidden and the assembly in the yard and the flight reconnaissance and the letter to Daenerys and what the letter said and what her letter back said and the white in the box and the lords in the courtyard and 4 dragons and Valyrian steel, and the specific quality of the cold stopping. He wrote the names of everyone who was there. Not just the lords, every ranger, every soldier, every person who had stood in the castle yard and looked at a white stopping and decided that the calculation had changed. He wrote Aemon's name first. He wrote Aemon Targaryen, called Maester Aemon, who held this watch for 60 years, and who understood before anyone else what the watch was for, and who spent his whole life in service of that understanding. He held a dragon before he died. He was satisfied. He wrote Sam's name. He wrote Ed's. He wrote Jaime Lannister's, and noted the one hand and the Kingsguard style, and the fact that he'd come when asked, and had fought without complaint, and had gone home after to do the harder thing. He wrote the 47 names from the second ranging, one by one, the same way he'd written them the first time. Their names and what they'd done, and that they'd held. He wrote Ned Stark's name, and what Ned had carried for 15 years, and what the carrying had cost him, and what it had produced. He wrote his mother's name. He wrote Rhaegar Targaryen's name with the specific, careful honesty of someone who was not going to simplify a complicated person, but was also not going to apologize for him. He wrote, he believed in a prophecy and organized his whole life around the belief, and the belief was real, and what the believing cost was also real. And both of those things are true, simultaneously, and anyone who tells you the history is simple, is lying. He wrote Daenerys' name last. He wrote, she read 30 years of ranging reports and came west to stop the dead. She fought at the wall and beyond it. She is governing the realm. He folded the document. He gave it to Sam. He said, 2 copies, one here, one to the Citadel. Sam said, they'll put it in the archive. Jon said, good. Sam said, future maesters will read it. Jon said, that's what archives are for. Sam held the document. He said, you wrote Aemon first. Jon said, yes. Sam said, he would have. Jon said, I know. He looked at the wall through the window, at the specific quality of the afternoon light on the ice, which was the quality it always was, which was completely itself. He was the reason any of this was possible. The watch maintained, the records kept, the chain of information that let me understand what I was looking at when I found the egg. He paused. He deserved to be first. Sam said, "He did." Jon looked at the wall. He said, "Worth the looking." Sam said, "What?" Jon said, "Something Ed said, about the wall, about the difference between people who look at it like a burden and people who look at it like it's worth the looking." Sam said, "And?" Jon said, "It was." He turned from the window. "It is." He picked up his cloak. "Come on. The retinue leaves at dawn and I'm going to make Ed's day worse if I'm still here when it does." Sam said, "You're coming back." Jon said, "For rangings, for the quarterly reports, to stand at the top of the wall and remember what it's for." He paused. "Yes, I'm coming back." He went. Scaros was in the yard, in the specific patch of warmth he'd created for himself beside the eastern wall, the iron-grey scales and the gold eyes tracking Jon's exit from the building. He got on the dragon. They went south. The wall receded behind them. It stood. It had always stood. It was going to keep standing.